She grabbed the dress with both hands and ripped. The sound cut through the entire ballroom, fabric tearing, silk splitting at the shoulder seam, and for one horrible second, nobody breathed. Not the 30 relatives seated around the long dinner table. Not the catering staff frozen near the walls. Not Nia Kang, who stood there with red wine, still drying on her chest from an hour ago, now watching her mother-in-law hold the ruins of the most beautiful thing her husband had ever bought her. Mayan Kang smiled, like she'd won something, like this was the moment she'd been building toward for 3 years. And maybe it was. If you were sitting at that table tonight, if someone had done that to you, in front of everyone you were supposed to call family, what would you have done? Would you have screamed, walked out? Or would you have stood there the way Nia did, completely still, because you loved someone so much that even their family's cruelty wasn't enough to make you run? Stay with this story, because what happens next, what walks through that door, is something none of them saw coming. And if this is your first time here, subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss what comes next. These are the stories that stay with you. Drop a comment telling me your city and country. I want to see how far this story travels. And if it moves you, leave a like. It means more than you know. Now let's go back to the beginning. The dinner had been Taejun's idea. Not the party itself that was Mayan's production. As always, a $100,000 anniversary celebration for the Kang family name, held in the mansion's main ballroom, with imported floral arrangements and a private chef flown in from New York. Taejun had simply said, 3 weeks before, we'll be there. Naya and I together. He'd said it the way he said most things, quietly, finally, in a way that didn't invite discussion. Mayan had smiled and said, of course. Naya had known, even then, that the smile meant something else entirely. She'd been married to Taejun for 3 years, and she had learned to read the Kang family's faces the way you learn to read weather, not because anyone had taught her, but because survival required it. The polite nod from Taejun's aunt that landed half a second too late. The way Sora's compliments always curled at the edges, like paper held near a flame. The particular silence that fell over a room when Nia walked into it and Taejun was not beside her. She had learned all of it, and she had kept learning it alone. Tonight she dressed carefully. The emerald green gown was the one Taejun had chosen himself 3 months ago, pointing at it through a boutique window on their anniversary trip to Chicago. He'd said something that wasn't quite a compliment and wasn't quite a declaration, something like that's the right color for you, and she'd understood it the way she understood most of what he didn't say aloud. So she'd worn it tonight like armor, like a small private flag. The car had barely stopped at the front entrance when his phone rang. She watched his face change. Not dramatically, Taejun didn't do dramatic. Just a slight tightening around the jaw. His thumb pressed against the screen, and he spoke 3 words into the phone that she had come to recognize as the sound of her evening dissolving, "I'll be there." He'd turned to her with something that wasn't quite guilt and wasn't quite apology. 2 hours, he said, maybe less. Go, Nia told him. It's your family's party, Taejun. I've met these people before. Go handle your business and come back. He studied her face for a moment, that habit of his, reading her the way she'd learned to read them, and whatever he found there must have looked like calm, because he nodded. He kissed her once at the corner of her mouth. Then the car pulled away, and Naya walked through the mansion's front doors alone. She had done it before. She could do it again. What she could not have predicted was how different it would feel this time. The ballroom was already full when she arrived, and the shift happened the moment she crossed the threshold. She felt it rather than saw it, a cooling in the room's temperature that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Heads turning. The particular quality of silence that meant her presence had registered and been found inconvenient. Mayan was standing near the head table with 2 of Taejun's aunts when she spotted Naya. For a fraction of a second, just a fraction, something flickered across the older woman's face. Then the mask came back on, smooth and practiced, and Mayan crossed the room with her arms slightly extended, the performance of welcome. Nia, the name in Mion's mouth, always sounded like a mispronunciation. Where is my son? He had to step out for a meeting. Be back soon. Something moved behind Mion's eyes. Of course he did. It was 4 words. It shouldn't have landed the way it did. But Naya felt it settle into her chest, like a stone, dropping into still water, and she understood immediately. Tonight was going to be different. Tonight, for some reason she couldn't yet name, Mayon had decided the pretense was optional. She found her seat not beside Taejun's place at the head table. She noticed, but 2 seats down and across, positioned between an elderly uncle who immediately turned to speak with someone else, and a woman Nia had never met who introduced herself as a friend of Sora's from university. The seating chart had been rearranged since the last time Nia had seen it, 3 weeks ago, when Taejun had forwarded her a copy. Someone had moved her. She knew who. She sat down. She accepted a glass of water. She smiled at the stranger beside her and asked a polite question about how she knew the family. She was good at this, at making the performance look effortless, at showing exactly enough warmth to be socially adequate, without giving anyone ammunition. She had been good at it for 3 years. What she hadn't accounted for was Sora. Taejun's younger sister arrived at the table, 20 minutes into the first course, already slightly too loud, trailing 2 friends and a cloud of expensive perfume. She was beautiful in the way that Kang family women were bred to be precise, curated, every element of her appearance calibrated for effect. And she had always, from the very first dinner 3 years ago, looked at Nia the way you look at something that has gotten into a room it shouldn't be in. Oh, Nia. Sora settled into a chair diagonally across the table, reaching for her wine glass immediately. You actually came. I wasn't sure you would, with Taejun not here. Why wouldn't I? Nia said pleasantly. Sora smiled over the rim of her glass. No reason. Just it must be a little strange, right? Coming to a family event without your husband. Not particularly. Sora swirled her wine. I just think it takes a certain kind of confidence. To walk into a room where you know most people would rather see you somewhere else. She paused. Admirable, really. The 2 friends laughed, soft and practiced, like they'd been cued. Naya picked up her fork and turned her attention to the food on her plate. She did not rise to it. She had a rule one she had made for herself in year 1 of this marriage, when she had finally understood the landscape she was navigating. You do not give them the reaction they're looking for. You do not cry. You do not snap. You do not walk out. Because the moment you show them they've broken something, they own that break forever. So she ate her dinner. She listened to conversations happening around her without being invited into them. She refilled her own water glass when the server passed her by twice without stopping. She noticed with a calm that surprised even herself that nobody at this end of the table spoke directly to her for 37 minutes. She counted. It was something she did now. Counted. Cataloged. Kept a running internal record of every slight, every omission, every calculated cruelty, not because she planned to use any of it, but because naming a thing made it smaller. If she could reduce their behavior to data, it couldn't reduce her. That was the theory, anyway. The wine happened 40 minutes in. Sora had been talking holding court, really, her voice carrying the particular ease of someone who has never had to earn a room's attention when she reached across the table for the breadbasket, and her elbow caught her wine glass. The movement was too smooth, too precise. The glass didn't wobble or tip, it went over completely, in exactly the right direction, sending a wave of red wine directly across the table and onto the front of Nia's emerald dress. Cold soaking, instant. Naya went completely still. The table went completely still. Then the laughter started, small at first, like someone had forgotten to hold it in, and then spreading, moving around the table in a ripple that Naya watched with something almost like detachment. She noted who laughed. She noted who looked away. She noted the 2 people a cousin she barely knew, and the woman who had introduced herself as Sora's university friend, who were actually covering their mouths. Oh no, Sora said. She didn't sound like oh no. She sounded like she was trying not to smile and not quite managing it. I'm so sorry, here. She was already pulling a cloth napkin from her lap, making the gesture of offering it across the table, but her eyes were bright and pleased and not sorry at all. Naya took the napkin. She pressed it against the fabric of her dress, methodically, working from the center of the stain outward. She did not look up. She did not let her hands shake. She felt the wine soaking through the napkin, cool and then cooling faster, and she kept her breathing even, and her shoulders level, and her face as neutral as she could make it. "These things happen," she said quietly. That was when Mayan spoke. The older woman had moved to stand near the head of the table. Naya hadn't noticed her approaching, and her voice, when it came, was conversational. Pleasantly conversational, the way you talk about weather. "A woman like you can wear our name," Mayan said. "She will never belong to our family." The ballroom went silent. Not the soft silence of people pretending not to listen. The hard, complete silence of a room that has stopped pretending entirely. Naya looked up. She looked directly at Mayan Kang, at this woman who had smiled at her wedding, who had kissed her cheek at holidays, who had said welcome to our family in a toast 3 years ago, with a champagne glass raised, and she felt something she hadn't expected. Not rage, not humiliation, something colder, something that had been building for a long time and had just, finally, been allowed to have a name. She did not cry. She would not cry. She pressed the napkin against her dress one more time deliberately, and then she folded it and set it on the table beside her plate. She sat straight. She looked at me on the way you look at someone you have decided. In this precise moment, you no longer need to perform for. "That was unkind," Nia said. It was not a dramatic statement. It was not a comeback. It was simply the truth, stated at normal volume, and something about the plainness of it made the silence in the room go even deeper. Mayan's expression didn't change. If anything, the pleasant quality in it sharpened. "Honesty often is," she said. Nia did not respond. She stayed seated. She would not leave. She had decided that before Mayan even finished speaking, because walking out of this room would mean handing them a story they would tell for years. The wife who couldn't handle the truth and ran. She would not give them that. What nobody at the table knew, what not a single one of them had any reason to expect, was that Taejun's meeting had ended 90 minutes early. What nobody knew was that his car had turned back toward the mansion 45 minutes ago. What nobody knew was that he had stood in the doorway of the ballroom for long enough to hear his sister's laughter, long enough to see his wife pressing a napkin against a ruined dress, long enough to hear his mother deliver those words in that pleasant conversational voice. "A woman like you can wear our name. She will never belong to our family." Nobody knew any of that. Not yet. Naya picked up her water glass and took a careful sip. Her hands were steady. She was proud of her hands, how they never betrayed her, when the rest of her was barely holding together. Across the table, Sora had resumed talking, her voice lighter now, looser, the way people talk when they think something has been decided in their favor. The relatives who had laughed had slid back into their own conversations. Mayan had drifted back toward the head table, her point made, her evening apparently satisfied. Only the woman beside Nia, Sora's university friend, whose name Naya had already forgotten, turned to her quietly and said, just above a whisper, "Are you all right?" Nia looked at her. She was young, this woman, mid-20s maybe. She had the look of someone who hadn't quite understood, until now, what kind of event she'd been invited to. "I'm fine," Nia said. She almost believed it. What she was, underneath the steadiness and the careful posture and the hands that didn't shake, was exhausted. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. The kind that lives in your chest, in the place behind your sternum where you keep the things you can't put down and can't carry much longer. She thought about the photograph. Mayan's birthday. 8 months ago, the family photographer lining everyone up, Mayan directing positions, and the moment when Nia had stepped forward to join the group and Mayan had simply turned to the photographer and said, "Are we ready?" As if Nia weren't standing there. As if the question of whether she was included wasn't even worth answering. She thought about the dinners she hadn't been told about until afterward. The holiday plans that were already finalized by the time anyone thought to mention them to Taejun, and even then, not to Nia. The women Sora invited deliberately, pointedly, with a smile, who had history with Taejun, who knew the family, who fit into this world the way Nia was supposed to understand she never would. She thought about Taejun's uncle at Christmas, leaning across the table to tell her quietly, that Taejun was a man who would come to his senses eventually. The uncle had said it kindly, almost. Like he was doing her a favor. Like he was preparing her for something inevitable. She had smiled and thanked him for the wine recommendation he'd given earlier in the evening, because there was nothing else to say. 3 years of this. 3 years of Taejun arriving, and the temperature in the room shifting back to normal. Everyone warm and courteous and family-shaped. 3 years of the real revealing himself the moment he walked out the door. 3 years of Nia in between carrying it, cataloging it, building the habit of silence, because the alternative was placing a grenade in the middle of her own marriage, and pulling the pin herself. Because Taejun loved his mother. She knew this. It was one of the things she had known before she married him, that this man who could terrify a room into silence with a single look, who had built an empire on the kind of reputation that people didn't question, had a particular softness in exactly one direction, his family, his mother especially. And Naya understood what it meant to love someone enough to protect them from things that would hurt them. She understood it the way you understand a trap you're already standing in. The dessert course arrived. Naya accepted a small plate of something chocolate and didn't taste any of it. She watched the room continue its evening around her, the conversations, the laughter, the particular performance of wealthy contentment, and she kept her face arranged in an expression that communicated, "I am fine. I am present. I am not the kind of woman who makes scenes at family dinners." She was so good at the performance. She had gotten too good at it. And the cost of that, the thing she hadn't let herself calculate yet, was becoming harder to avoid looking at directly. When the plates were cleared and the servers moved through the room with fresh champagne, Mian stood at the head of the table to give a small speech. It was gracious, charming, perfectly calibrated for the audience. She thanked everyone for attending. She spoke about family legacy and the Kang name and the importance of knowing where you come from. She made eye contact with everyone at the table, except Nia. Nia sat with her champagne glass held lightly in both hands and watched her mother-in-law look through her as though she occupied no space at all. And she thought, he will come home tonight, and I will say the party was lovely, and he will believe me, because he needs to believe me, and we will go to sleep, and tomorrow it will all still be here, exactly where I left it. She thought, I cannot keep doing this, she thought, but I don't know how to stop. The speech ended. The applause was warm and appropriate. Sora was laughing at something again, that bright, sharp laugh of hers that had started to feel like a sound that lived specifically in the back of Nia's skull. And that was when Mayon set the envelope on the table. Not in front of Nia, between them placed on the white tablecloth with deliberate care, as though she were presenting something that required careful handling. Cream-colored envelope, thick, the kind that costs money just to produce. Nia looked at it. She didn't touch it. Open it, Mion said. Her voice was pleasant again. That voice. The one that made cruelty sound like conversation. Nia didn't move. Nia. Mieon said her name, the way she always said it like a mispronunciation, like a word in a language she'd never bothered to learn properly. Open it. Slowly, because she refused to be rushed, Nia set down her champagne glass. She opened the envelope. Inside was a check Kang Family Trust, printed across the top in clean, embossed lettering for $2 million. And beneath the check, folded into thirds on heavy legal paper, was a document she recognized immediately, even before she read the header. Divorce papers, already signed by an attorney, already notarized, just waiting for one more signature. The room had gone very quiet. People who hadn't been watching were watching now. This was the thing about Mayon. She always knew how to make a moment land when she wanted an audience. The terms are generous, Mayon said. The house in Portland, the one Taejun bought for your mother's days. We're not asking you to give anything back, just to stop asking my son to choose between his family and a mistake he made when he was lonely. Nias stared at the check. $2 million. The number sat in her mind, with a strange, almost dreamlike quality. She thought about what $2 million meant. She thought about her students, the ones she stayed late for 3 nights a week, the ones who came to school without having eaten, the ones who had started to trust her because she showed up consistently in a way that some of them hadn't experienced before. She thought about the classroom she had fought her department for, the books she had ordered with her own money when the school budget ran short, the work that mattered to her in ways she had never found language adequate enough to explain to the Kang family, who looked at literature, teacher, the way you look at a hobby someone has mistaken for a vocation. She thought about Taejun, about the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, about the morning 3 weeks ago when she'd been grading papers at the kitchen table and he'd come downstairs and made her coffee without asking and set it beside her hand and not said anything, just gone to make his own. And somehow that small, quiet, unremarkable thing had felt like the truest version of what they were together. She pushed the check back across the table. "I didn't marry your son for his money," she said. She said it simply, flatly, without performance. Mayan looked at the check for a moment. Then she smiled the smile that meant she'd been waiting for exactly this answer. "No," she said. "You married him because you forgot what you are." And there it was, the ugliest version of what Mayan had always meant, finally stripped of the polite packaging. Said aloud, in front of 30 people, in a room that had gone so quiet Nia hear the sound of her own heartbeat in her ears. Nia stood up. She stood up slowly, because her legs were not entirely steady and she needed a moment to make sure they were before she trusted them. She picked up her small evening bag from the back of her chair. She thought, "I am done. I am finished. I will walk out of this room and tomorrow I will have a conversation with my husband about what cannot continue, and it will be the hardest conversation of our marriage, but I cannot sit at this table for one more second." She was almost clear of the table. Then she felt the hand on her arm. Not a light touch, a grip. Mion's fingers closing around Nia's forearm with a firmness that made Nia stop and turn. And that was when she saw what was about to happen, and still didn't fully believe it until it did. Mion reached past her. She took the shoulder of the emerald green dress in both hands. And she pulled. The fabric tore at the seam, that specific, awful sound of silk separating, and Nia felt the dress give at her shoulder, the tear running down toward the bodice, the dress that Taejun had chosen, that she had worn as armor, splitting open at the hands of his mother. The room fell silent in a different way than before. Before, it was the silence of people enjoying a performance. This was the silence of a room that didn't know what to do next. Then a voice came from the doorway, quiet, completely steady. The voice of a man who has learned that volume is for people who need to prove something. "Take your hand off my wife." That was the first thing Nia registered, not the voice itself, not even the figure in the doorway, but the absolute, collective stillness of 30 people who had, half a second ago, been breathing normally and were now not breathing at all. 30 people who had spent the last 2 hours performing the various rituals of family celebration, and who had now, in the space of a single sentence, been turned to stone. Mayon's hands were still on the dress. The fabric was still torn. And Taejun Kang was standing in the doorway of his own ballroom, with his coat folded over his left arm, and his right hand loose at his side. And his face was the most frightening thing Nia had ever seen on another human being, not because it was angry, but because it was not. It was completely, utterly, terrifyingly calm. The kind of calm that isn't peace. Kind that is what comes after a decision has already been made. Mayon let go. She stepped back, not dramatically, not in a stumble, but with a small, deliberate movement that communicated something Nia had never seen from this woman before. Not guilt, not fear exactly. Something that lived just below fear, in the territory where people go when they realize the rules of a situation have changed entirely, and they don't yet know what the new rules are. Nia reached up and held the torn shoulder of her dress together with one hand. It was an automatic motion, not a conscious one. Her fingers found the split fabric and pressed it closed, and she stood there with her hand holding herself together, literally, and looked at her husband across the length of the room. Taejun looked back at her. Something passed between them that had no language. Something that had been building for longer than tonight, longer than either of them had named. Then he walked in. He crossed the room the way he crossed most spaces, without hurry, without performance, with the particular quality of movement that meant every person between him and his destination unconsciously shifted out of his path without being asked. Chairs didn't scrape. People didn't stumble. They simply moved. The room rearranged itself around him, the way water rearranges itself around stone. He stopped in front of Nia. He didn't look at the dress. He looked at her face directly, specifically, reading it the way he read everything, with the patience of a man who understood that the truth of any situation lived in the details other people decided weren't worth examining. Then he set his coat around her shoulders. He did it carefully. Both hands, lifting the fabric, settling it over the torn dress, making sure it covered the damage at her shoulder. It was a simple motion. It took 4 seconds, and it was the most public statement Nia had ever seen him make. He still hadn't spoken to anyone else in the room. He hadn't looked at his mother. "How long?" he asked. His voice was quiet. Just for Nia. Just the two of them, in a room of 30 people who were holding their breath. Nia opened her mouth. She closed it. She had spent 3 years building the habit of not answering this question. 3 years of "it's fine and don't worry about it, and your family is adjusting. Give them time." 3 years of carefully dismantling every opportunity for this exact moment, because she had been so certain, so completely and exhaustingly certain, that protecting him from the answer was the kindest thing she could do. Her silence answered for her. She watched it register in his face not as surprise, which would have been easier, but as something slower and more complicated. The expression of a man revising a version of the world he had believed in, replacing it in real time with a version he had refused to look at directly, and understanding for the first time the dimensions of what he had refused to see. He turned. He turned toward the room, and something changed in the way he occupied his body. It was subtle, the way a door changes when someone turns the lock from the inside. The same object, exactly the same, but now operating under entirely different terms. Iyama, he used the Korean word deliberately. He always used it when he wanted something to land without softness. Mayon had recovered. Nia could see it, the particular recalibration of a woman who has been caught, but has not yet conceded, who is already assembling the alternative version of events and preparing to deliver it with confidence. Mayon had been doing that her entire adult life. She was very good at it. Taejun, his mother's voice was careful, warm even. The voice of a woman who has decided that this is a misunderstanding, and she is going to explain it. You didn't see what happened before you came in. This woman... I've been in this house for 20 minutes, Taejun said. The room went a different kind of quiet. Mayon stopped. I came back early, he continued. My meeting ended at 9:15. I came in through the east entrance because I didn't want to interrupt the dinner. He paused. I heard the speech. Mayon's jaw tightened just slightly. I heard the offer, Taejun said. I heard what you said after she pushed the check back. The silence in the room had a texture now. Dense. Almost visible. And I watched you put your hands on my wife's dress. Mayon's chin lifted. Nia recognized the motion the particular way Mayan Kang responded to corners, which was to try to make herself taller inside them. Don't. Taejun's voice didn't rise. It dropped. Don't explain it. Don't reframe it. I know what I saw. You saw the end of something, Mayan said, and her own voice had shifted now, the warmth gone, replaced by something Nia had heard before, but never in Taejun's presence. The real voice, the one that came out when Mayan decided performance was no longer worth the energy. You didn't see what she said. You didn't see the way she sat at this table, in this family's house, looking at all of us, like we were something beneath her. That's a lie. It came out of Nia's mouth before she'd made any decision to speak. Flat. Certain. That is a lie. And everyone sitting at this table knows it. Several people looked away. Mayan turned toward her slowly, like a weather system turning. Be careful, Mian said quietly. No. Nia's hand was still holding the torn fabric at her shoulder. She was aware of it, the slight tremor in her fingers that she was refusing to let become a visible shake. I've been careful for 3 years. I have been careful every single day of this marriage, and not one person in this room can say I was ever rude to them, ever disrespectful, ever anything except exactly what you expected a woman in my position to be. She stopped. And it made no difference. None of it. Mayayon's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes sharpened. Because no version of me was going to be acceptable, Nia continued. Not more educated, not more quiet, not more of anything. You'd already decided before you met me. The only thing you didn't account for was that your son meant it when he said I was his family. The room was very still. Taejun was looking at her with an expression she couldn't fully read attention, and something underneath it that might have been grief, or might have been the look of a man hearing the shape of a wound, described for the first time after years of there was no wound. Mayon let the silence settle for exactly 3 seconds. Then she looked at Taejun. This is what she does, Mayan said. This is what I've been trying to tell you. She performs. She performs the patient wife, she performs the reasonable one, and her voice tightened. You see what she wants you to see. Yama. Taejun's voice was completely level. You offered my wife $2 million to leave. I was protecting, you were protecting what? The first crack in the leveling. Not a raised voice. A precision, a specificity, in the question that made everyone at the table understand he actually wanted the sentence finished. Say it. What were you protecting? Mayon's jaw worked. She had not expected to be required to say it in those words, in that room, with that audience. The family, she said finally. Everything we've built. Our name. Our name. Taejun said it back to her without inflection. Naya has been carrying our name for 3 years. She has done it without complaint. She has shown up to every event, every dinner, every obligation, while you and Sora made sure she understood she wasn't welcome. He paused. And she never told me. He turned toward Nia at that. Why? He asked. Not accusatory, something rawer than that. Nia met his eyes. Because I knew what it would cost you, she said quietly. And I wasn't willing to make you pay it. Something moved through Taejun's face that he didn't try to conceal. It lasted a second. Then he looked back toward the table, and the control came back. And he was once again the version of himself that rooms like this had learned to be careful around. Sora had been quiet since he'd walked in. Naya noticed it the unusual quality of Sora's silence, which was nothing like the silence of someone chastened or frightened. It was the silence of someone thinking, calculating, trying to identify the exit. Taejun Appa. Sora's voice, when she found it, was softer than usual. Younger. She used the Korean honorific deliberately, reaching for something the little sister register, the appeal to shared history. You're upset. You should have seen... Did you spill the wine? He asked. Sora blinked. On Naya's dress, he said. Earlier tonight. Did you spill the wine, or did you knock the glass over deliberately? Pause was 1 second too long. It was an accident. Sora. Her mouth closed. The name in his voice landed differently than it did in anyone else's. Nia had noticed it before the way Taejun could make a single word function as the entirety of a cross-examination. The way his family, all of them, had been trained by years of his particular kind of authority, that certain things were not worth attempting in front of him. Sora looked down at the table, which was answer enough. Taejun was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that accumulates weight the longer it holds. Around the table, no one was eating, no one was drinking. The caterers near the walls had gone so still they might have been furniture. Do you understand? Taejun said, and he was speaking to the room now, not to any one person. What I have been building, this entire time, so that this family could stand where it stands. Do any of you actually understand what it costs? Nobody answered. Nobody was going to answer. I assumed, he continued, that the people I was building it for understood what I needed in return. Not money, not obedience. Respect. For my marriage. For my wife. For the one choice in my life that I made entirely for myself. Mayon's composure fractured slightly, just at the edges. You're making a scene over my wife. He said it without heat. Yes, I am. I should have made this scene 3 years ago. And I didn't because I believed that eventually he stopped. Exhaled once. I believed you would come around. I was wrong about that. I was wrong because I didn't ask the right persons how things actually were. He looked at Nia. She looked back at him. Come here, he said. She walked to him. It wasn't a dramatic walk, not a triumphant crossing of the room, with heads turning. She was still holding the torn shoulder of her dress, together with one hand, and wearing his coat over her shoulders, and her legs were not entirely steady, and she was very tired. She crossed the room and stood beside him, and he took her free hand and held it, and didn't let go. Mayan watched this with an expression that had passed through fury and arrived somewhere colder. More dangerous, in its way, because it was the expression of a woman who had decided she had nothing left to lose. You would do this, Mayan said quietly, in front of our family, in front of everyone I've invited to this house. You would take her side and humiliate me. I would tell the truth, Taejun said, in front of everyone. Yes, then you should know, Mayan's voice tightened, that you are not the only one who can make decisions tonight. The room shifted. Something in those words, the particular construction of them, the controlled fury underneath the surface made several people at the table look at each other with the specific discomfort of people who know something is coming and have no idea whether they want to witness it. Mayan reached into the inner pocket of her jacket. She produced a folded document and placed it on the table with that same deliberate care she'd used with the envelope an hour ago. The same gesture, the same studied precision. I've been holding this for 6 months, she said, waiting to see if you would come to your senses on your own. She looked at Taejun. This is a petition, filed with the board of the Kang Family Trust, signed by 11 family members, including 3 of your father's brothers. She paused. It requests a formal review of your authority over the family assets, on the grounds of decision-making that is not in the family's interest. The room was absolutely still. Even the people who had, until 30 seconds ago, been spectators to someone else's conflict now understood that the shape of the evening had changed completely. This was no longer a dinner party with a difficult scene. This was something else. Nia felt Taejun's hand tighten around hers just slightly, for just a second. Then it relaxed. 6 months, he said, yes. You've had this ready for 6 months. I have. He nodded slowly. The nod of a man receiving information that adjusts his understanding of a larger picture, slotting a piece he'd been missing into its correct position. And the 11 signatures, he said. Are any of those people in this room tonight? Mayan didn't answer, which meant yes. Taejun looked around the table. Slowly, without expression. The way you look at a room when you're doing arithmetic in your head, counting things up, arriving at totals. Several people did not meet his eyes. All right, he said. Just that. All right. He released his hand for a moment, reached into his jacket, and produced his phone. He made a call. 1 ring. The person on the other end picked up before the second. It's me, Taejun said. I need you to pull every document we filed with the family trust in the last 18 months. All of them. And call Park and tell him I need him available at 7 tomorrow morning. He paused, listening for 3 seconds. No. Tonight's handled. Just have everything ready. He put the phone away. Then he picked up the document from the table. He read it, not skimming, actually reading it, his eyes moving steadily from top to bottom, turning the single page over, reading the reverse. It took 1.5 minutes. Nobody spoke for 1.5 minutes. He put it in his jacket pocket. You made a mistake, he said to Mayan. Mayan's chin lifted again. I made a decision for this family. You assumed that the family trust operates on sentiment, he said. It doesn't. My father made sure of that. He held her gaze. Every asset in that trust that carries any real liquidity, every investment account, every foundation endowment, every revenue-generating property is administered under my sole discretionary authority. That was written into the trust documents in 2009. I'm sure the lawyer who helped you draft that petition explained as much, and if he didn't, he was taking your money for bad advice. He paused. A board review can be requested. It can also be denied. By me. Tonight, Mayan stared at him. For the first time in 3 years, Naya watched Mayan Kang look genuinely uncertain. You would do that, Mayan said. Her voice had changed again, the coldness still there. But underneath it now, something she hadn't allowed to show before. Something that might, in someone less controlled, have been called desperation. After everything this family has given you, after everything Don't. His voice was very quiet. Don't make this about what you've given me. Not tonight. I raised you. And I provided for you. For all of you. For 15 years. He paused. I did it because you were my family and I wanted to. I did it because I believed that was what family meant. He looked at her steadily. Tonight you tried to pay my wife to disappear. Tonight you stood in my house and tore her dress. Tonight I found out that this has been happening, one form of it or another, for 3 years, and Naya has been protecting me from knowing, because she loves me enough to spare me the choice. His voice didn't waver. So don't speak to me right now about what you've given me, he said. Because tonight I'm doing the accounting on what this family has cost my wife while I wasn't watching. The room had stopped being a party entirely. It was something else now, a reckoning, a restructuring that everyone present understood would be referenced for the rest of their lives. As the night, everything changed. Sora made one more attempt. She stood up from her chair abruptly, her own composure cracking now, in a way that was less calculated than her usual performances, more genuinely rattled. This isn't fair, Oppa. You walk in for 5 minutes, and suddenly everything is her version of events. Did you invite Ji Yeon Choi to the April dinner? Taejun asked. Sora's mouth stopped. Ji Yeon Choi, Nia knew the name. She had sat across from the woman at that dinner, had watched Sora make the introduction with that particular brightness she saved. For moments she was especially pleased with herself, and she had understood immediately what the invitation meant without anyone having to explain it. Jiyeon and Taejun had history, not ancient history, not irrelevant history. That was just a dinner. Sora started. Did you invite her specifically because you wanted Nia to be uncomfortable? Yes or no? Sora looked down at the table. The second time someone in this room had looked at that table rather than answer him. I've been paying for your apartment in Belltown for 4 years, Taejun said to her. Not cruel, just accurate. Your position at Kang Capital. Your car lease, your travel, he stopped, exhaled. I didn't do those things to buy your loyalty. I did them. Because you're my sister and I wanted you to have stability while you figured out your life. He paused. I need you to understand that what you've been doing to my wife is not something that has no consequence. Sora looked up then. Her eyes were bright, not with tears exactly, but with the precursor to them, the held-back version. Appa, not tonight, Sora, he said quietly. Tonight I need you to sit down. She sat, and for a long moment the ballroom was quiet enough that Nia could hear the distant sound of traffic outside the mansion's walls, the ordinary noise of the city continuing its ordinary business, while inside this room, everything that had been hidden for 3 years sat exposed under the light. Naya became aware, gradually, that she had been holding tension in her chest for so long years, actually, this specific form of it, that the simple act of standing next to Taejun in this room, while the truth existed openly in the air between all of them, felt like breathing differently. Like a muscle, unclenching that she hadn't known was clenched. She was not relieved. It was too early for relief, and she knew enough about what came after nights like this to understand that the morning would arrive with its own complications, its own difficult conversations, its own reckoning between her and Taejun that had nothing to do with his family and everything to do with the silence she had kept. But she was not alone in the room. For the first time in 3 years of standing in this house, she was not alone in the room. Taejun turned to the head of the table, where Mayeon still stood, with the carriage of a woman who had not yet accepted defeat and might not be capable of it. I'm going to tell you what happens now, Taejun said to his mother. Not as a threat, as information, because you deserve to know what tonight means. Mayeon held his gaze. Your access to the Family Foundation accounts, the ones you've administered for the last decade, I'm suspending that authority effective tomorrow morning. My attorney will contact yours by noon. He paused. Properties held in your personal use that fall under trust administration, the Mercer Island House, the Scottsdale property, I'll need those reviewed. That process starts this week. Mayan's face had gone still. The stillness of someone who is doing their own accounting now and finding the numbers worse than expected. She started. This is the consequence, he said, of what you've done, of what you've been doing. He paused. I loved you enough to assume the best of you. For 15 years, for my whole adult life. I'm not going to pretend that what I found out tonight doesn't matter, because you're my mother. You're choosing her, Mayan said. The words were quiet, almost bare, stripped of the layers of strategy that usually cushioned everything she said. You're choosing her over your own blood. Taejun looked at his mother for a long moment. I'm choosing my wife, he said. The way I should have made clear, I was choosing her every day for the last 3 years. He reached for Nia's hand again, held it. And Mayan Kang, who had spent 30 years being the most powerful person in every room she entered, stood at the head of her own dinner table and looked at her son, holding the hand of the woman she'd tried to break, and understood in the way you understand a thing that cannot be taken back, that she had miscalculated the distance between her son's patience and the end of it. What none of them knew yet, not Naya, not even Taejun, was that the document in his jacket pocket was not the only thing Mayan had prepared over 6 months. And what Mayan had not yet revealed was going to force a choice that made tonight look like a warning. The ballroom had emptied of noise but not of people. That was the strange part. 30 relatives, still occupying their chairs, still holding wine glasses and dessert forks, but the room had the quality of a space that had been evacuated of something essential. The warmth, the performance of occasion, the collective agreement to pretend that the evening was what it had been advertised as being. Taejun had the document in his jacket pocket and Nia's hand in his, and Mayan was still standing at the head of the table with her chin up, and that expression Nia had never seen on her before, not quite defeated, not quite calculating. Something in between that was more unsettling than either. Then Mayan said, "There's something else." 2 words and the temperature in the room dropped. Taejun didn't move. "Say it." Mayan reached into her jacket again, the same inner pocket, the same deliberate motion, and produced not a document this time, but a small silver USB drive, the kind that costs $8 at a pharmacy. She set it on the table between them. 6 months ago, Mion said, "I hired someone to look into your wife's background." Nia felt the words land in her chest before she fully processed them. Iamat Taejun's voice carried the first real warning it had held all evening. Not her personal history, Mayan continued, and her voice had found a new register, not the pleasant performance, not the cold fury of 20 minutes ago, but something almost clinical. The voice of a woman delivering a report, her finances. Specifically, the financial history of her family. Her mother. Nia went very still. Her mother, Minion, said, accepted money from this family. From your father, 14 years ago. The silence that followed was different from every silence that had come before it tonight. This one had weight, specific directional weight, and it was pointed at Nia. Taejun's hand, still holding hers, didn't tighten, didn't release, stayed exactly where it was, which was somehow worse than either alternative. "I don't know what you're talking about," Nia said. Her voice came out level. She was distantly proud of that. $40,000, Mayan said. Paid in 2 installments in March and April of 2011. From a Kang family subsidiary account to an account held by Evelyn Chambers. Your mother's name before she remarried. She paused. I have the wire transfer records on that drive. Naya's mouth was dry. She had been 19 in 2011, a sophomore at the University of Washington, working 2 part-time jobs to cover what her financial aid didn't reach, calling her mother every Sunday from a dorm room where the radiator didn't work properly. 2011 was the year her mother had paid off the second mortgage on the house in Renton, an event Naya had registered with relief and a vague curiosity. She had never pushed too hard because her mother had said it was a loan from a cousin, and Naya had been 19 and overwhelmed and grateful, and had not asked follow-up questions. She had not asked follow-up questions. You're lying, Nia said. The words came out before the thought was fully formed. The records are on the drive, Mayan said simply. Why would my father Taejun started? Because your father met Evelyn Chambers at a conference in Portland in 2010, Mayan said. She delivered it without drama, without apparent satisfaction, which was almost worse. They had a correspondence several months. When it ended, the money was part of the arrangement. She looked at Taejun directly now, not at Nia. I found out about it 2 years after your father died. I've spent 4 years deciding whether you needed to know. She paused. And then your wife showed up. The room was so quiet that Nia could hear the wax dripping from a candle somewhere to her left. She became aware that her free hand, the one not held by Taejun, had pressed itself flat against her sternum, against the torn fabric of her dress, and his coat over it, pressing as though it could hold something in that was in danger of coming apart. "You're saying," Taejun said slowly, "that my father paid Nia's mother money." "Yes. And you think that means something about why Nia married me?" Maijan held his gaze. "I think it's information you deserved before you signed a marriage certificate." "That's not what I asked." Mayan was quiet. "Say it plainly," Taejun said. "Whatever you're implying, say it where everyone can hear you." Mayan looked at Nia. "I think it's possible," she said carefully, "that this wasn't a coincidence. That a woman whose mother had a financial connection to this family, who knew at some level that the Kang name meant sent access to a certain kind of life, made a choice about who to pursue. And I think my son deserves to ask himself whether the woman holding his hand right now has ever been fully honest with him about what she knew and when she knew it." The word pursue landed on Nia's skin like something physical. She let go of Taejun's hand, not because she meant to, because her hand opened on its own, the way hands open when the muscles that control them have been overridden by something else entirely. Taejun turned to look at her. She couldn't read his face, and that frightened her more than anything Mayan had said. In 3 years of marriage, she had learned to read him, the slight tension around his eyes that meant he was thinking something. He hadn't decided whether to say, the way the line of his shoulders changed when he was tired versus when he was on guard. She knew his face. She had studied it the way you study a language you live in. Right now, she couldn't find anything she recognized. "Did you know about your mother and my father?" he asked. His voice was very quiet, not cold, something more careful than cold. "No," she said. She said it immediately, because it was the truth. It was absolutely, completely, entirely the truth, and she needed him to understand that before any other part of this conversation happened. "I knew my mother paid off her mortgage in 2011, she said. "She told me it was a family loan. I didn't ask more than that because I was 19 and I was drowning in my own life and I trusted her." She stopped. "I never knew your father's name until I met you. I never knew anything about your family until I met you at a faculty event at UW, where I was presenting a paper on Toni Morrison, and you were there because the department head was someone your company had dated to, and we talked for an hour about books." She felt her voice trying to shake, and she held it steady through something that took more effort than she had available. "That is how we met. You know that." "I know how we met," he said. "Then you know I didn't—" "I know how we met," he repeated. And the repetition had a different quality the second time. Not reassurance. Something being held at arm's length while he examined it. Nia felt the floor shift under her. Not literally. But the sensation was close enough to physical that she reached out and put her hand on the back of the nearest chair. She understood, with a clarity that was almost clinical, what was happening. Mayan had not needed the accusation to be true. She had only needed it to exist to be placed in the air between Nia and Taejun at a moment when every other revelation of the evening had already destabilized the ground. A seed planted in soil that had just been turned over. She didn't need it to grow tonight. She just needed it to be there. And it was working. She could see it working. "Taejun," her voice was steady. She was grateful for that. "Look at me." He looked at her. "I did not know," she said. "I would have told you if I'd known. I have no reason to have hidden it, and every reason to have told you, because this," she gestured slightly at the room, "at the evening, at the general wreckage of the last 2 hours. This is exactly the kind of thing that would have helped you understand why your family's resistance to me was never going to be resolved by patience." Something shifted in his face. Not resolution, not belief exactly, but the look of a man who is doing the hardest kind of thinking, the kind where you're trying to distinguish what you know from what you feel, and they are pulling in opposite directions. "I need to see the drive," he said. He wasn't tonguing to Nia. He picked up the USB drive from the table. He turned it over in his hand once. Then he put it in his pocket with the petition document. "This conversation isn't over," he said to Mayan. "But it's done for tonight. Mayan held his gaze for a moment. Then she gave a small, composed nod, like she'd expected exactly this outcome and had planned around it, which Nia realized she probably had. Taejun turned to the room to the 30 relatives who had witnessed the entire evening and were now sitting in the specific discomfort of people who have seen too much and don't know what their presence in that witnessing makes them. "The evening is finished," he said. Nobody argued. Nobody asked questions. Chairs scraped back, and people reached for their coats and bags with the movements of individuals who want very badly to be in their cars and not thinking about any of this. Naya stood where she was and watched them leave and felt something happening in her chest that she didn't have a clean word for. Not quite grief, not quite rage. Something that lived in the territory between them, the feeling of a person who has just watched the structure they built their life inside get tested in ways it wasn't designed to survive and isn't yet sure what's standing and what isn't. Sora left without speaking. She passed within 4 feet of Nia and looked at her just once briefly, and in that look was something Nia hadn't expected from her. Not triumph, which would have been comprehensible. Something closer to the expression of a person who has watched a thing go further than they intended and is now standing in the aftermath of their own miscalculation. Then she was gone. The caterers began moving through the room with the efficient, deliberate focus of professionals who are very good at not appearing to notice anything. The floral arrangement stood untouched. The candles burned down. The room emptied, and then it was just Nia and Taejun. He stood near the head of the table, with his hands in his pockets, and the room around them and the distance between them that hadn't been there an hour ago, and was now the most real thing in the space. "Say what you need to say," Nia told him. "I'm not ready to say it yet." "Taejun, I need an hour." He looked at her directly. He stopped, pressed his lips together. "I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm telling you I need an hour to think before I have this conversation, and I need you to let me have it." She had learned in 3 years of marriage to this man that there were times when pushing was the right move, and times when it destroyed something you couldn't rebuild. She had learned to tell the difference, mostly. "Okay," she said. She went upstairs. She sat in their bedroom, his bedroom, technically, the master suite of a house that still didn't feel like it belonged to her, no matter how many of her books were on the shelves. And she did not cry, not yet. And she did not call anyone, because there was no one to call who would understand the specific geometry of this situation. And she sat on the edge of the bed, in his coat, over her torn dress, and she thought about her mother. Evelyn Chambers, who was now Evelyn Roark, who lived in a house in Renton, with a garden she was proud of, and a husband who fixed vintage motorcycles in the garage on weekends. Who had called Nia every Sunday until Nia moved in with Taejun, at which point she'd switched to Thursdays because Nia's Sundays got complicated. Who had sent a card for every one of Nia's students' academic achievements over the years, actual handwritten cards, because Nia sent her updates, and her mother always responded as though these children were known to her personally. Who had apparently accepted $40,000 from Taejun's dead father 14 years ago and said nothing about it for 14 years. Nia picked up her phone. It was 11:47 p.m. Her mother would be asleep. She called anyway. 4 rings. Then Evelyn's voice, rough with sleep, and then sharpening fast the way mothers' voices do when they register that a call at midnight means something has happened. "Nia? What's wrong? Did you know a man named Hansen Kang?" Nia asked. Silence. 3 seconds of it, which was its own answer, regardless of anything that came after. "Nia, did you? Where is this coming from, baby?" "Mom." Nia's voice cracked on the word just slightly, and she heard it and pulled it back. "I need you to tell me the truth. Right now. Tonight. I'm sitting in this house and my marriage is... I need you to tell me the truth." Another silence, shorter. Then a long exhale. "Yes," Evelyn said. The room did something to Nia's vision. A slight displacement, as though the walls had moved an inch, and then returned. "I met him at a conference," Evelyn said. "It was a long time ago. We talked a few times over a few months. Nothing," she stopped. "It wasn't anything serious. When it ended, he offered to help, and I needed help, and I took it." What it was. $40,000. A pause. He told you. His mother told my husband. The silence on the other end of the phone was a different kind than the ones before it. This was the silence of a person who has been holding something for a long time and has just felt the shelf give way. "Oh, baby," Evelyn said quietly. "Why didn't you tell me?" Nia's voice was very controlled, very flat. The flatness of something that has been squeezed past the point where ordinary emotions have room to move. "When I told you I was seeing him. When I told you his name. When I brought him home for dinner and you sat across the table from him. And why didn't you say anything?" "Because it was 14 years ago, and it had nothing to do with you two." "It has everything to do with us now," Nia said. "His mother just used it in front of 30 people to suggest that I married him knowing about it. To suggest that our entire relationship was that I was—" She stopped. She breathed. "She suggested that I was strategic about it, Mom. That it wasn't a coincidence. That's insane. I know it's insane. I know. But I'm sitting here, and I can't say for certain that Taejun completely believes me, and that is because you didn't tell me, and I didn't know. So when it came out tonight, I had no—" She stopped again. "Context. I had nothing. I looked like someone who was hiding it." "You weren't hiding it? You didn't know—" "I know that." Her voice came out sharper than she intended. "I know that, Mom. But I needed to be the one who told him about this. Years ago, or at least before tonight. And I couldn't do that because I didn't have information you should have given me." Evelyn was quiet. In the silence, Nia could hear her mother's breathing slightly uneven, the breathing of someone who is trying not to cry and using all their focus on the effort. "I'm sorry," Evelyn said finally. It was genuine. Nia knew her mother's voice well enough to know when an apology was coming from the actual center of something, and when it was covering for something else. This was the real version. It didn't fix anything. But it was real. "I have to go," Nia said. "Is your marriage?" "I don't know," Nia said honestly. "I don't know yet." She hung up. She sat in the quiet for a while. She didn't measure how long. When she heard his footsteps on the stairs, she stood up. Not from some performance impulse, she just couldn't sit down for this conversation. Her body required vertical. Taejun came in. He had taken off his jacket and tie. He was holding the USB drive in one hand and his phone in the other. His face was the face she knew, not the controlled public version, not the version that rooms were afraid of, but the private one, the one with less armor. "I looked at it," he said. She waited. "The records are real," he said. "I had someone I trust verify the account numbers against our old family records. The transfers are documented." "Okay," she said. "And I called my mother's investigator. The man she hired." He paused. "He confirmed that the correspondence between my father and your mother was that it wasn't ongoing, that it ended cleanly, that there was no—" He stopped, exulted. "There was no indication that your mother gave your name to anyone, or that you were ever connected to it in any way." Nia absorbed this. "So you believe me," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Something complicated moved through his face. "Yes," he said. "I believe you didn't know. But there's no but." "Taejun," her voice held steady. "I watched your face in that room when she said it. I watched you think. I'm not angry about that you're allowed to think. You're allowed to take it in, but don't tell me there's no but, and then stand there with that expression." He was quiet. "Say it," she said. "Whatever's sitting in you right now. Say it to me." He set the drive and phone on the dresser. He pressed both hands flat against the surface for a moment, looking down, and she recognized that motion, the physical anchor he used when he was trying to organize something that didn't want to be organized. "In 3 years," he said slowly, "you kept everything from me. Everything they did to you. You hid it. You managed it. You told me things were fine when they weren't. And He stopped. "I let you. Because I didn't ask the right questions. Because I assumed that if something was really wrong, you would tell me. I didn't want to put you in the middle. I know why you did it." He turned to face her. "I understand why. That doesn't mean it didn't cost something." He paused. "We have been in this marriage for 3 years, and there has been an entire dimension of your life in this family that I didn't have access to. And tonight, some of what I found out from my mother, in a room full of people, when I could do nothing but stand there and realize I had been—" He stopped. I had been uninformed about my own wife's experience. In my own house, Naya opened her mouth. She closed it. Because she could hear, underneath what he was saying, the specific shape of the wound, not accusation, but something she hadn't anticipated. Not anger at her choices, something rawer, something that had to do with a man who controlled most things in his life, discovering a blind spot in the one area where he had believed he was paying attention. I was protecting you, she said. I know. I didn't want you to have to choose. I know, Nia. His voice wasn't sharp. That was the difficult part. It would have been easier if there was an edge to it she could push back against. But you made that decision for me. For 3 years. You decided what I could handle and what I couldn't, and you managed it alone. And now I'm standing here realizing that while I was out there handling my world, my wife was in this house he stopped, being treated like that. And I didn't know. Nia felt something in her chest give way. Not collapse, but shift. The way foundations shift before you know whether they're settling or cracking. I couldn't stand watching you choose, she said quietly. Between me and them. I knew you would choose me, and I knew what it would cost, and I couldn't. That choice was mine to make, he said. It was always mine. You took it from me. The words weren't delivered as an attack. They were delivered as a truth he had just finished locating, and that made them harder to sit with than anything said in anger would have been. Naya sat back down on the edge of the bed. Her hands were in her lap. She looked at them, the hands that had stayed steady all night, through the wine and the dress and the divorce papers and the ballroom full of people who wanted her to break, and realized they were shaking now. Finally, here in the private room, with only him watching. I don't know how to do this differently, she said. I grew up watching my mother handle everything alone. I learned to handle things alone. That's not an excuse. It's just she stopped. I don't know how to ask for help, even from you. Even when I need it. Taejun sat down beside her. Not close. A foot of space between them on the edge of the bed. But beside her. We can learn that, he said. She looked at him. Both of us, he said. I wasn't asking the right questions. I wasn't making it clear enough that I wanted the real as answer when I asked how things were. He looked down at his hands. I knew something was off. I've known for 2 years something was off. I told myself it was adjustment. I didn't push because I didn't want to open something I'd have to act on. He exhaled. So I'm not standing here saying, you did everything wrong and I did nothing wrong. I'm saying we both built something that couldn't hold the weight we were putting on it. Nia absorbed this. And the money, she said. Your father. My mother. Is something that happened 14 years ago between two people who are not us, he said. Doesn't have anything to do with us. Your mother will try to use it again. Let her try. His voice was calm. I know what I know. They sat in the quiet for a while. The house around them was still. The caterers had gone. The guests were gone. The machinery of the evening had wound itself down. Just the two of them in the room that had always been more his than hers, and the space between them on the bed that was real and needed to be named, but was not the whole story. Then Taejun's phone rang. He looked at the screen. His face did the thing it did in business contexts, the slight, specific tightening that meant the call was one he hadn't anticipated and wasn't certain he wanted. He answered it. Naya watched him listen. She watched his face go through 3 changes in 20 seconds attention, then a kind of focused stillness, then something she had only seen on him twice in 3 years of marriage. The expression of a man receiving information that reorganizes his understanding of how much danger he is actually in. When he said into the phone, he listened. How many? He listened again. Don't move anything until I get there. He stood up. 30 minutes. He hung up. He looked at Nia. The petition my mother filed with the trust board, he said. The one with 11 signatures. Yes, it was a diversion, he said. While I was in this room tonight dealing with the dinner, dealing with all of it. He stopped. 3 people with signature authority on the operating accounts of Kang Capital filed an emergency transfer request. $11 million, moving to an external holding account that was created 4 days ago. He paused. The bank flagged it and called our office officer, who just called me. Nia stared at him. The account that received the transfer request, he said, is registered to a shell company. But the formation documents list a co-signatory. His jaw was tight. My mother's maiden name. The room felt very different than it had 60 seconds ago. This was planned, Nia said. The dinner, he said. Petition. The USB drive, all of it exhaled sharply. All of it was to keep me occupied, to keep me in this building, managing this situation while someone moved money. Taejun, I have to go. I know. She stood up. Go. He looked at her, the full look, the one that saw her, all of it, the torn dress and his coat over her shoulders, and the evening on her face, and the conversation they'd just had, and everything that was still unfinished between them. We're not done, he said. I know, she said. When I come back, I'll be here, she said. Go handle it. He moved toward the door. Then he stopped. He turned back and crossed the room and put both hands on either side of her face and looked at her for 2 seconds that were very full of things neither of them had words for. Yet. Then he walked out. Naya stood in the room and listened to his footsteps on the stairs, the front door, the car. Then silence. She looked at herself in the mirror across the room, his coat, her torn dress beneath it, the evening's wreckage, arranged on her face, and understood that nothing about tomorrow was going to look like anything she had planned for. That the version of her life she had been carefully maintaining, the one where silence was a form of protection and endurance was a form of love, had reached the end of what it could hold. She would have to become someone who asked for things. Someone who said the true answer when asked how she was. Someone who understood that protecting the people she loved from hard choices was not kindness, it was the quiet, well-intentioned theft of their agency. She would have to learn to do that. She looked at herself in the mirror for a long time, and she didn't look away. And the woman looking back at her was not the woman who had walked into a ballroom 6 hours ago, wearing an emerald dress like armor. She was something less polished than that, and possibly, for the first time, something closer to real. Outside, $11 million was moving through the dark, and Taejun was driving toward it, and Myeon Kang, wherever she was tonight, had played her largest card and was now waiting to see if it was enough. The drive to the Kang Capitol Tower took 22 minutes. Taejun made it in 14. He didn't remember most of it, the specific sequence of lights and turns, and the particular texture of Seattle at midnight, the city running its quieter engine, the waterfront passing on his left, like something happening in another dimension. His hands were on the wheel, and his eyes were on the road, and the rest of him was somewhere else entirely, running numbers, reconstructing the evening from a different angle, now that he understood what the evening had actually been. The dinner, the petition, the USB drive. 90 minutes of his attention completely occupied, while 3 people with signature authority executed a transfer request he was never supposed to find out about until the morning, when the money would already be 3 steps removed from anything traceable. $11 million. He parked in the underground structure and was in the elevator before the car had finished settling. The building was mostly dark at this hour. Skeleton crew, security, the overnight risk team. He rode up to the 31st floor, and the doors opened, and Daniel Park was waiting, which meant Daniel had been standing at those elevator doors for at least 10 minutes, which meant it was bad enough to warrant standing. Daniel was 53 years old and had been Taejun's chief risk officer for 9 years. He was not a man who stood at elevator doors. Walk me through it, Taejun said without stopping. Daniel fell into step beside him. Transfer request came in at 9:47. 3 co-signatories Byungjin Kong, Mihaeon Ro, and Jinsu Lim. All 3 have Class A signature authority on the operating accounts. He was reading from a tablet as he walked, keeping pace. The receiving account was registered 4 days ago to a Delaware Shell's Sioha Capital Advisors LLC. Formation documents filed with a nominee director, which is standard for a shell, but the beneficial ownership disclosure lists a second signatory. He paused. Myeon Kang, using her maiden name. Myeon Park, Taejun said. Correct. They reached the glass-walled situation room, what the overnight team called it, though it was technically just the senior conference room with better screens. 3 people inside already, the overnight compliance officer, a woman named Grace, who looked like she hadn't slept in 20 hours, and 2 members of the financial crimes unit who had been pulled in from whatever they'd been doing at midnight. Taejun looked at the screens. The transfer request was flagged in red across the primary monitor. $11,200,000. Initiated at 9:47, flagged automatically at 9:51 by the bank's large transfer protocol, held pending senior authorization at 10:03. Who held it? Taejun asked. The bank's risk algorithm held it automatically, Grace said. It exceeded the threshold for same-day processing without executive review. They called our after-hours line at 10:45. And our after-hours line routed to me, Daniel said. Which is why I called you. Taejun pulled out a chair and sat down. He looked at the screen for a long moment without speaking. Around the table, 3 people who were very good at their jobs watched him think and did not interrupt. Byungjin, Mihaeon, and Jinsu, he said. Yes, Byungjin was his father's younger brother. 61 years old. He had never built anything in his life. He had inherited a position on the family trust board and treated it as a pension. Taejun had kept him on because removing him would have cost more in family conflict than it was worth. And because the man's authority was real, but his initiative had always been essentially zero. Until apparently tonight, Mihaeon Ro was a cousin on his mother's side. 54. She had been one of the people at the dinner table who had not met his eyes when he looked around the room after Mayeon produced the petition. Jinsu Lim was the family's longtime financial manager, not technically a Kang, but so embedded in the family's financial infrastructure over 30 years that he functioned like one. He had been at Taejun's parents' wedding. Taejun had called him Uncle Jinsu until he was 17. Can the transfer be reversed? Taejun asked. The transfer hasn't completed, Daniel said. Been held. As of right now, the money is still in the operating account. I want it frozen, not held frozen. Lock the account entirely until I say otherwise. Done. Daniel was already typing, and I want the signature authority of those 3 individuals suspended from every account in this institution, effective tonight. He paused. Get Park Ji-hoon on the phone. It's midnight. Get him on the phone, Daniel. Daniel stepped aside and made the call. Taejun looked at the screen. He looked at the transfer request, at the account name Sioa Capital Advisors, at the formation date 4 days ago. He thought about what 4 days ago meant. 4 days ago was Tuesday. Tuesday, he had been in Portland for a meeting that his mother had known about specifically because she was the one who had suggested, 3 weeks prior, that he meet with the Portland Development Group, that the timing was right, that it was worth the overnight trip. He had been in Portland for 26 hours. His mother had used those 26 hours to finalize a shell company. He sat with that for a moment. The specific geometry of it, planning required, the patience, the knowledge of his schedule, his habits, his systems, the kind of knowledge that only comes from proximity, from years inside the architecture of someone's life. He thought about Nia. He thought about her sitting in a room full of people who had been performing courtesy for 3 years, and what that performance had required from her, and what it had cost, and how she had absorbed the cost alone because she loved him enough to believe protecting him from it was worth what it was doing to her. He thought about himself, driving to Portland, on a trip his mother had suggested, while his mother used the window of his absence to build the infrastructure for stealing $11 million from his company. 2 people in his life, using his absence in completely opposite directions. One trying to protect him, one trying to take from him. He had been so focused on the wrong threat for so long. Park Ji-hoon was on the phone. Taejun could hear Daniel's voice in the corner of the room, explaining the situation in rapid Korean, and then Daniel crossed back and handed him the phone. Tell me you have documentation on the Sioha formation, Taejun said without preamble. Ji-hoon's voice on the other end was alert, no sleep roughness, no disorientation. The man was a lawyer who had worked financial crime cases for 15 years before coming to work for Taejun, and he had the particular quality of being most alert when situations were worst. I'm looking at the Delaware filing now. The beneficial ownership disclosure was filed voluntarily. They didn't have to disclose it at formation stage, which means either they made an error or they were confident it wouldn't matter because the transfer would be complete before anyone looked. Exactly. Ji-hoon paused. Taejun, see, this was planned carefully, but it was planned to be invisible after the fact, not before. The fact that it was flagged is the best possible outcome. What do I need to freeze everything tonight and make it hold? The suspension of signature authority needs to go through the board of the operating company, not the trust. That's a different governance structure. Ji-hoon was typing. Taejun could hear it. I can have an emergency resolution drafted in 40 minutes. You sign it as sole managing director of Kang Capital LLC, which you are. It supersedes the Class A authorities on a temporary basis pending investigation. And draft it. Ji-hoon paused. If you want this to have teeth legally, if you want to pursue this as financial misconduct rather than just a family dispute, you need to file a report with the bank's fraud unit tonight and let them initiate their own investigation. Independent of anything you do internally, do it. That means it becomes a matter of record. Outside the family? I know what it means. He paused. Do it. He handed the phone back to Daniel and sat back in his chair. Grace from compliance was watching him with the expression of someone who has something to say and is calculating the right moment. He looked at her directly. He said, "There's a fourth name," she said. The room went quiet. "Not on the transfer request," she said quickly. "On the SEOSA formation documents. The nominee director is a standard registered agent, but there's a second beneficial owner listed alongside Mrs. Kang." She turned her tablet toward him. He read the name. He read it twice. Then he set the tablet down very carefully, the way you set down something you might otherwise break, and he pressed both hands flat on the table, and he breathed. Sora Kang, his sister, 28 years old, the apartment in Belltown he'd been paying for since she was 24. The position at Kang Capital Junior Development Associate, a role he'd created specifically because she needed structure and a salary, and he'd genuinely believed, that given the right environment, she would grow into someone solid. The transfer request was initiated at 9:47. At 9:47, Sora had been sitting at the dinner table in the mansion, watching Taejun respond to their mother's petition, occupying his attention. Available, visible, accounted for at the exact moment that 3 other people were executing a plan she had co-signed her name to. The dinner hadn't been a confrontation. It had been a distraction. All of it the escalated cruelty toward Nia, the torn dress, the divorce papers, the USB drive with the records of his father and Nia's mother, all of it calibrated to land at maximum impact, to ensure that Taejun would be wholly consumed, that he would be managing emotion and revelation and family crisis, from the moment he walked through the door until well past midnight. While $11 million moved, he stood up. Daniel took a step toward him reflexively, which meant something was readable on his face. He made it stop. He collected himself the way he had trained himself to do over 20 years, in rooms that required it, the breath, the deliberate relaxation of the jaw, the hands loose at his sides. "Get me addresses," he said. "Current tonight. Byungjin Mahian, Jinsu Lim." He paused. "And Sora. Taejun, not to approach them. For documentation." He looked at Daniel steadily. "I'm not going to anyone's house tonight. I'm going to do this correctly. But I need to know where they are." Daniel nodded and stepped out. Taejun pulled out his phone and looked at it for a moment. No messages from Naya. He had told her he'd be back, and she had told him she'd be there, and he believed both of those things. And the believing felt different than it had 48 hours ago, less assumed, more chosen. He thought about calling her. He decided against it. Not because there was nothing to say, but because what he wanted to say to her required a different setting than a glass-walled conference room at midnight, with 3 compliance officers and a lawyer on the phone, and $11 million sitting frozen in an account 4 floors below him. What he wanted to say to her was, "I understand now why you didn't tell me. I don't agree with it, but I understand it, and I'm not going to let it be a wall between us." He wanted to say, "I spent 3 years believing my family was adjusting to something they had actually existed to destroy from the start, and that was my failure, not yours." He wanted to say, "Come home. Numfsan, let me figure out how to be a better partner to someone who has been carrying weight I should have been helping with." Instead, he sent a text that said, "I'm okay. This is going to take a few hours." Get some sleep if you can. Her response came back in under a minute. I'm not sleeping. Take your time. I'll be here. He put the phone away. He spent the next 4 hours in that room. The emergency resolution came through at 1:15 a.m., 2 pages. Legally airtight, suspending the Class A signature authority of Taejun Kang, Mahyun Ro, and Jinsu Lim, pending a formal investigation into the transfer attempt. Taejun signed it with the particular steadiness of a man who has been making hard decisions for long enough that the act of signing no longer requires him to think about what he's doing to the people involved. You think about it afterward, or you think about it before. During, you just sign. The bank's fraud unit was notified at 1:47 a.m. At 2:20 a.m., Daniel came back into the room with a look on his face that Taejun had learned to interpret correctly. Not bad news exactly, but news of the kind that changes the shape of a problem. Jinsu Lim's phone went active 40 minutes ago, Daniel said. He accessed his personal email and then made 2 calls. He paused. One to Byung-jun, one to a number we traced to a legal firm in Vancouver, BC. They know the transfer was flagged, Taejun said. They know, which meant they were already in motion, consulting, regrouping, potentially preparing to dispute the suspension of authority. A legal fight, which was fine. A legal fight was a fight Taejun had the resources to win and the documentation to outlast. What concerned him more was the second name on the list. 2:40 a.m., he asked Daniel for Sora's current location specifically, whether the tracking on the company car she drove had placed her anywhere relevant tonight. Daniel looked at the screen for a moment. She left the mansion at 11:15, he said. Drove to the Belltown apartment. Stayed there 12 minutes. He looked up. Then drove to SeaTac. Taejun was very still. She's at the airport? His voice was quiet. Daniel checked again. The car is in the short-term lot. We don't have access to ticketing information. Taejun called her. It rang 6 times and went to voicemail. He called again. 6 rings. Voicemail. He put the phone down on the table and pressed both hands flat against the surface and looked at the screen and did the arithmetic of what his sister going to an airport at midnight after the evening that had just occurred actually meant. She had signed documents as a beneficial owner of a shell company that had attempted to receive 11 million stolen dollars. When the plan failed, she had gone to her apartment 12 minutes, long enough to pack a bag and then to the airport. His sister's was running. He stood up. I need someone at the gate level, he said. Not to stop her, that's not our jurisdiction, and I'm not involving. He stopped. I need to know if she's boarded anything. Daniel was already on his phone. Taejun walked to the window. 31 floors up. Seattle spread below him in its nighttime configuration, the waterfront lit, the Space Needle visible to the north. The ordinary geometry of a city that didn't know or care that a family was fracturing itself in a glass room above its streets. He thought out Sora, at 7 years old, following him around their parents' house in the way that younger siblings do when they have decided that an older sibling is the most interesting thing in their world. He thought about teachings. He thought about teaching her to ride a bicycle in the parking lot of their father's office building on a Saturday morning when they were the only ones there. He thought about the call he'd gotten 8 years ago when she was 20, crying from a party she'd wanted to leave, but was afraid to leave alone, and how he'd driven 40 minutes at 2 a.m. without asking why, just to be the person she could call. He thought about her sitting at the dinner table tonight, her specific silence, the silence he'd read as being rattled, as being someone who had watched a situation go further than intended. He had misread it completely. She hadn't been rattled. She had been watching the clock. Daniel came back. No international departures in the last 2 hours under her name. Domestic, there was a 1:15 a.m. flight to Las Vegas, a 1:50 to Los Angeles. Los Angeles, Taejun said. He didn't know why he said it. Instinct, or the memory of Sora mentioning, twice in the last year, a friend who had moved to Silver Lake, someone from her university years. A name he couldn't retrieve. Pull the manifest, he said. Through our legal contact at the airline, not law enforcement. I don't want. He stopped. Not yet. Daniel nodded. At 3:10 a.m., the confirmation came back. Sora Kang had boarded a 1:50 a.m. flight to Los Angeles International Airport. Taejun sat down in his chair. He sat with it for a while. The specific weight of a sibling choosing, at the critical moment, departure over confrontation. It wasn't surprising. He understood Sora well enough to know that her default response to consequences she couldn't manage was to put distance between herself and them. He had watched her do it her entire adult life in smaller ways. This was the same impulse, scaled to the situation. What it meant, practically, was that she had given him no opportunity to decide how to handle her. She had removed herself from his decision-making. Whatever he did next legally, financially, personally would happen in her absence, which meant it would happen without the conversation that needed to happen between them. He wasn't sure, sitting there at 3 a.m., whether he was more angry or more tired. Called Nia. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey," she said. "Hey," he paused. "Sora's gone to Los Angeles." Silence on the other end. "Then she ran?" "She ran, oh Taejun." The way she said it, not "I told you so," not a summary of the evening's justifications. Just those two words with the texture of someone who understands what it costs to watch a person you've spent your life taking care of choose to disappear undid something in him that had been held very tightly for a very long time. He pressed the phone against his ear and looked at the window and let himself feel the weight of the night fully for about 15 seconds. Just 15. That was all he allowed. "I'll be home in an hour," he said. "I'll be here," she said. He hung up. He spent the next 50 minutes closing everything out, signing the documentation, confirming the account freeze, establishing the investigation protocol, making sure that every person in that room understood precisely what was authorized, what was not, and what happened to anyone who acted outside those boundaries. He was thorough. He was specific. He wasted no words. At 4:05 a.m., he rode the elevator back down to the parking structure. He sat in his car for a moment before starting it. Outside the windshield, the concrete structure was quiet and ugly and entirely indifferent to everything that had happened in the last 7 hours. He appreciated that about concrete. It had no opinion about the Kang family. It just existed. He started the car and drove home. The house was lit downstairs, the kitchen light, the small lamp in the front hall. She had left lights on for him. He stood in the doorway. He stood in the doorway for a moment, registering this before he went inside, registering the specific quality of a house where someone has stayed awake because they wanted to be present when you came back. She was in the kitchen. Not dramatically. She wasn't waiting at the door, wasn't positioned for an emotional reunion. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of something that had probably been tea 2 hours ago and a book she'd been reading with insufficient attention, judging by the fact that the page marker hadn't moved from roughly the same position he'd seen it in 3 days ago. She was still wearing the emerald dress under his coat. Her feet were bare. She looked tired and real and more familiar to him than almost anything else in the world. She looked up when he came in. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down heavily in it, not with the controlled, deliberate motion that he usually occupied chairs with. Just sat down the way a person sits down when they are done with the effort of managing how they appear. She waited. "The transfer is frozen," he said. "The fraud investigation is open. Byungjun and Mihyun will lawyer up by morning. Jinsu," he paused. Jinsu I'm still processing. I've known him 30 years. She nodded. "Sora is in Los Angeles." He said it flatly. She ran. Naya looked at her hands for a moment, then back at him. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet." He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. I need to sleep before I make any decisions about Sora." "That's the right call." "Is it?" He dropped his hands and looked at her. "Because part of me wants to get on a plane and have the conversation tonight, and part of me knows that nothing useful would come from doing it at 4 in the morning when I'm—" He stopped. "When I'm like this." "You're exhausted," she said. "I'm more than exhausted." He looked at her steadily. "I'm angry. I'm the kind of angry that needs to not be in a room with the people I'm angry at, because I've said enough things that can't be unsaid tonight already." She held his gaze. "What did you say that you didn't mean?" He thought about it. "Nothing," he said. "That's the other problem. I meant all of it." She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached across the table and put her hand over his. Not a dramatic gesture, just her hand on his, warm and present. Your mother planned this for 6 months, Nia said. She used the situation, with me and your family as cover, as a mechanism to occupy you while she moved money. Yes, that means she paused. Everything she did to me, Taejun, including tonight, including the wine and the dress and the divorce papers. Part of the reason she escalated all of it, tonight of all nights, was because it needed to be big enough to keep you in that room. He looked at her. She weaponized her cruelty toward me, Nia said quietly. She knew you'd come in and deal with it, because you're you and you don't walk away from things. So she made it as big as she could. He sat with that. Which means, she continued, that at some level, she knew you well enough to know that if she could just keep you focused on me, on our marriage, on your anger at her behavior toward me, she could buy enough time. And instead I came home early. And instead you came home early. He looked at her, at his wife, who had spent 3 years absorbing cruelty, in part to protect him, and who was now sitting across from him at 4 a.m. in a torn dress, helping him understand the geometry of a betrayal that dwarfed anything that had happened in the ballroom. I need to tell you something, he said. She waited. I have not been... He stopped, started again. I have not paid enough attention to what my family was doing when I wasn't in the room. I knew things weren't perfect. I told myself it was adjustment, family friction, things that would smooth out over time. He paused. That was a choice. I made it because looking directly at it meant acting on what I saw, and acting on it meant a conflict I kept deciding to postpone. Taejun, let me finish. His voice was quiet, not harsh, just needing to complete the sentence. I postponed it long enough that it became tonight. I postponed it long enough that you spent 3 years being treated like an outsider in your own home, alone with it, managing it alone because you were trying to spare me a choice that I should have been making anyway. She didn't say anything. I'm not going to tell you that what you did was right, he said. Hiding it, managing it alone, because it wasn't right for you and it wasn't right for us. He paused. But I understand why you did it. And I'm not... He stopped. I'm done postponing things. She pressed her hand more firmly against his. I called my mother tonight, she said. He looked at her. She confirmed the money, the correspondence with your father. She held his gaze. She said she was sorry. I don't know yet whether sorry is enough. I have to think about that. She paused. But I thought you should know that I didn't wait. That I called her the minute I knew. He nodded. I'm not asking you to forgive her, he said. I know. That's separate. That's yours. I know, Taejun. They sat in the quiet kitchen at 4 a.m, and the night settled around them, all of it. The weight of it, not resolved, not cleaned up, not packaged into something manageable, but real and present and shared between them for the first time. The emerald dress was still torn at the shoulder. He reached out, not thinking about it, just moving, and touched the torn fabric lightly. His fingers on the torn seam. Just for a second. I'll have it repaired, he said. It might be beyond repair. Then we'll get another one. He met her eyes. Same color. Something shifted in her face. Not quite a smile. Something that had been waiting longer than tonight to exist. There are things I need to deal with in the next few days, he said. My mother. The legal situation. Sora, he paused. None of it is going to be clean. I know. And I need to do some of it in front of you. Not to protect you from it, but because you're my family, and this is our life, and the habit of keeping it separate ends now. He looked at her steadily. Both directions. She held his gaze for a long moment. Okay, she said. Okay, I'll stop protecting you from things that are yours to know, she said. And you stop making decisions about your family that include us without me in the room. She paused. That's the deal. He looked at her, at this woman who had walked into a ballroom 6 hours ago, wearing an emerald dress like armor, and had stood through everything the night had thrown at her without breaking, and who was now sitting across from him at 4 a.m, making a clear-eyed deal about the terms of their partnership, as if this were the most natural conversation in the world. Deal, he said. He stood up, held out his hand. She took it. They went upstairs. The house was quiet. The city outside was quiet. Everything that needed to happen next, the legal proceedings, the confrontation with Mayan, the question of Sora, The long and necessary conversation with Nia's mother that Nia wasn't ready to have yet. All of it existed in the near future, real and waiting and unavoidable. But for a few hours in the dark, it could wait. At 7:15 the next morning, Taejun's phone rang. He was already awake, had been for 20 minutes, lying in the dark thinking through the sequence of the day, the order of operations, the calls that needed to happen before 9 a.m. Nase was asleep beside him. Finally, her breathing the slow, even rhythms of someone who had held herself together for so many hours that her body had simply surrendered to rest the moment it was allowed. He took the phone into the hallway. It was Daniel. The bank's fraud unit made contact with Byungjun this morning, Daniel said. They've requested a voluntary interview, and he's retained counsel. The interview is declined. Expected. There's something else. Daniel paused. Jinsu Lim made a call at 6:30 this morning. We flagged it. It was to Mayon Kang's personal cell. Taejun was still. What was said? We don't have content. Just the connection. Where is my mother? A pause. She spent the night at the Mercer Island house. She's still there, as far as we can tell. He looked at the ceiling of the hallway, at the wall, at the ordinary architecture of the house that was his, that had always been his, where his wife was sleeping in the room behind him after the worst night of their marriage, and possibly the most clarifying. I'm going to Mercer Island, he said. Taejun sis, I don't think that's. I'm not asking for an opinion, Daniel. I'm informing you. He paused. Have Jihoon meet me there at 9. He doesn't need to come inside. I just want him in the car. He went back into the bedroom. Nia was still asleep. He looked at her for a moment, the specific quality of her in sleep, the way her face looked, without the careful management she maintained when she was awake, more open, more tired, more herself than she ever allowed in rooms that required performance from her. He thought about writing a note. Instead, he sat on the edge of the bed and touched her shoulder lightly. She came awake fast, the way people do who have spent years half listening for things they couldn't afford to miss. I have to go to my mother, he said. She looked at him. Read his face. Now? Jinsu called her this morning. She knows the transfer was stopped. She knows the fraud unit is involved. He paused. If I let her have the morning to prepare, she'll have a position by noon that I'll spend 6 months arguing against. Naya sat up. Her hair was loose. The torn dress had been exchanged at some point for a shirt of his that reached her mid-thigh. She looked at him. The way she set him when she was deciding something. I'm coming with you, she said. Naya, I'm coming with you, she repeated. Not louder, just clearer. The tone she used when a decision had already been made, and she was communicating it, not asking permission for it. You said both directions. You said I was in the room. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, get dressed. The drive to Mercer Island took 35 minutes. They didn't talk much. Taejun drove, and Nia sat in the passenger seat with her hands in her lap and the city moving past her window, and at some point she reached across and put her hand on his arm, not gripping, just present, and left it there for the rest of the drive. Jihoon was parked outside the gate when they arrived. Taejun stopped and lowered his window. She's inside, Jihoon said. Her car is here. The housekeeper confirmed she's been up since 6. Stay here unless I call you. Jihoon looked at Nia. Both of you, Jihoon said, with the measured tone of a lawyer communicating that he has noted a situation and is not responsible for its outcome. Be careful what you say in there. Anything that sounds like a threat. I know, Taejun said, or an ultimatum that can be construed as Jihoon. Taejun looked at him. I know. He drove through the gate. The Mercer Island house was smaller than the Seattle mansion but older, more considered the house his parents had bought when they were first building the family's foundation, before the money reached its current altitude. His father had loved it, for reasons that had something to do with the view of the water and something to do with the fact that it was the first thing he had owned that no one could take back from him. Mayan had lived here, on and off, for 30 years. Taejun parked and sat for a moment. Beside him, Nia was very still. You don't have to do this, he said. I know, she said. No, I've been not doing things for 3 years, she said quietly. I'm done not doing things. He looked at her. She looked back. There it was, the thing that had kept him in that ballroom, the night he came home early, the thing that had kept him coming back to this marriage through every complicated month of it. Not her beauty, not the ease of being with her when things were easy. This, the specific core of her, the part that had absorbed 3 years of sustained, deliberate cruelty and come out the other side, still choosing to be present, still choosing to be honest, still sitting in the passenger seat at 7:45 in the morning, ready to walk into the next difficult room. He got out of the car. She got out of the car. They walked to the front door together. He rang the bell. The housekeeper, a woman who had been working for Jian for 12 years, opened the door and looked at them with the expression of someone who had been told to expect this and found the reality of it no less uncomfortable for the warning. "She's in the study," the housekeeper said quietly. They went through the house, through the entry with its particular smell of old wood and the specific arrangement of family photographs that had always lined the hallway, Taejun's childhood arranged on the walls in careful chronological order. He had looked at these photographs his entire life. He moved past them without stopping. The study door was closed. He opened it. Mayan was seated at the desk. She was dressed fully, carefully, as though she had expected exactly this visit and had prepared for it with the same precision she brought to every performance. She looked older than she had the night before. Not fragile Mayan Kang was not a woman who did fragile, but stripped of the particular energy that had animated her through the dinner, as though the plan being discovered had cost her something that the confrontation itself hadn't. She looked at Taejun. Then she looked at Nia, and something moved through her face, complex, unreadable, the expression of a woman encountering something she had not fully calculated for. "You brought her here," Mayan said. "My wife is here," Taejun said. "Yes." Mayan was quiet. "Dazan's called you this morning," Taejun said. He didn't sit down. He stood in the center of the room with his hands at his sides and his voice at its quiet, unhurried register he had maintained since the night before. "You know the transfer was flagged. You know the fraud unit is involved." He paused. "I'm going to ask you one question, Iyama, and I need you to answer me honestly, because the answer changes what I do next." Mayan held his gaze. "Did you think," he said, "that when this was over, however it ended, you would still have access to me?" Question sat in the room. Mayan looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted behind her eyes, the very first thing Taejun had seen from her in 24 hours that he couldn't immediately classify. Not strategy, not performance, something that might have been the beginning of understanding what she had actually done. "I thought," she started. "Don't tell me what you thought I would accept," he said. "Tell me what you actually believed. About us. About whether there was a version of this where you took $11 million from my company and I still called you on Sundays." The room was very quiet, and Mayan Kang, who had answers for everything, who had spent her entire life at being the most prepared person in every room she entered, opened her mouth, and Mayan closed her mouth. That was the answer. Not the words she didn't say. Closing. The way a person seals something when they realize that any version of the sentence they complete will cost them more than they're prepared to spend in front of a witness. She looked at her son, and then she looked at Nia, that specific look, the one Naya had received 100 times in 3 years. The one that communicated "you" are the variable that broke this equation. And then she looked back at her hands on the desk. "I thought," Mayan said carefully, "that you would understand." Taejun was very still. "I thought that when the anger passed," she continued, "you would see that everything I did was to protect what your father built. What I helped him build. For 40 years. Her voice was controlled. The precision of someone who has rehearsed a version of this speech and is now delivering the one that fits the actual room rather than the imagined one. The money wasn't leaving the family. It was being placed somewhere I could access it. Somewhere that didn't depend on me," Taejun said. Mayan was quiet. "Somewhere that didn't depend on my decisions," he said. "On whether I agreed with you. On whether I chose to keep financing a life you've built entirely on money you didn't earn." Something shifted in Mayan's face. The first crack in the composure, not grief, not guilt, but something older and more complicated. The expression of a woman who built her entire sense of security inside a structure that belonged to someone else and has just been required to see that clearly. Your father built this family, she said. My father is dead, Taejun said. Quietly, without cruelty, and I built the last 15 years of it. Which you know. Mayon's jaw tightened. Every decision I made, she said, and her voice carried the first tremor Nia had ever heard in it. I made for this family. I made for you. You think I wanted to spend my life managing people and relationships and the 1,000 things that keep a family like ours from falling apart? You think any of this was what I wanted for myself? I wanted. She stopped. She pressed her lips together. It doesn't matter what I wanted. I did what was required of me. And then you brought this woman into our home, and I watched everything your father and I built start to shift, start to change into something I didn't recognize. She stopped again. And you decided to take what you could before it changed any further, Taejun said. The room was silent. Naya had not moved from her position near the door since they'd come in. She had been standing very still, breathing carefully, taking in every word and every silence and every micro-expression on Mayon's face with the attention she brought to things she needed to understand completely before she decided how to respond to them. She understood now. She understood in a way she hadn't before, not the cruelty. She had always understood the cruelty at its surface level, but the architecture underneath it. Mion's fear, not of Nia specifically, of change. Of a world where the structure she had organized her entire identity around was no longer organized around her. Of a son who had built something larger than what his parents had begun, and who had made a choice she hadn't sanctioned, and who had demonstrated, through that choice, that his center of gravity had moved somewhere she couldn't follow. Cruelty toward Nia had been real. It had caused real damage. None of what Nia now understood about its source made it acceptable or forgivable or even fully explicable. But she understood the bone of it now, and understanding it changed something in the ways she was standing in this room. Mrs. Kang, Nia said. Both of them looked at her. Taejun with something that was partly surprise. He had expected her to be present, but perhaps not speak first. Not here. Mayon with the expression she reserved for Naya, the one that had always communicated that whatever Naya said was already being categorized as irrelevant before the sentence was complete. I'm not going to tell you that you were wrong about being afraid, Nia said. Her voice was even. Not warm, not cold. The voice she used in a classroom when she needed students to hear something they were resistant to. Change is frightening. Losing control of something you've spent your life managing is frightening. She paused. But I need you to hear me say this once clearly, without performance on either of our parts. Mayan held her gaze. She didn't speak. I did not take your son from you, Nia said. I did not take this family from you. I did not arrive in this house with any intention other than loving a man who asked me to build a life with him. She stopped. And for 3 years I absorbed everything you gave me, quietly, because I believed that if I was patient enough, and careful enough, and invisible enough, eventually you would see that. Her voice didn't waver. And what I understand now is that my being invisible was never going to be enough, because the problem was never anything I did. Problem is that I exist at all, that your son chose someone you didn't choose for him. That's what you've never forgiven. Mayans said nothing. I'm not asking you to forgive it, Nia continued. I'm not asking you to approve of me or accept me or any version of the performance we've both been putting on for 3 years. I'm done performing. She paused. But I am telling you that what you did last night, using me as a distraction, escalating the cruelty toward me so that your son would be occupied while you moved his money, that is the thing I will not let go unaddressed. Not because of what it did to me, because of what it required you to do. You had to be willing to hurt me badly enough to keep him in that room. You calculated how much pain I could absorb, and you used it. The silence in the study was very dense. Mayan looked at Nia for a long moment. The look had changed, still no warmth, no capitulation, but the dismissiveness was gone. Something had been replaced by something else. The particular attention you pay to a person you have consistently underestimated, who has just demonstrated the full extent of what you missed. You're more like him than I expected, Mayan said quietly. I know, Nia said. Taejun looked at his wife. Something moved through his face that he didn't manage, didn't control the look of a man who has just seen a dimension of the person he married that he knew existed but had never watched operate at full capacity. Then he turned back to his mother. "Here's what happens now," he said. "The fraud investigation proceeds. That is not something I can stop, and I would not stop it, even if I could. The bank is involved. The documentation exists. What Byungjin Mihan and Jinsu are facing is a legal matter, and it will follow its course." Mayan's hands were still on the desk, flat, controlled. "Your access to the family foundation accounts is suspended permanently," he continued. "The Mercer Island house, which belongs to the family trust. Not to you personally, I'm restructuring the arrangement. You can continue living here, but the terms will change." He paused. "I am not putting you out. I am not leaving you without resources. I am not." He stopped, breathed. "I am not the person who does that to his mother, even after last night. You know me well enough to know that." Mayan was looking at him with an expression that Naya had never seen on her before. Not in 3 years of watching this woman perform every variation of composed authority. This was something stripped of performance entirely, the face of an older woman sitting in a room where she has just understood the full dimensions of what she has lost. "The petition," Taejun said, "the attempt on the operating accounts. What you asked Byungjun and the others to do that has consequences that I cannot protect you from, because I won't. Not for this." He paused. "And Sora." He said his sister's name differently than he said the other things, with a weight that the other words didn't carry. "She's in Los Angeles," he said. "I know where she is. I haven't decided yet what I'm going to do about Sora. That conversation is its own thing, separate from this one." He looked at his mother. "Did you ask her to do it, or did she choose to be part of it?" Mayan was quiet for a long moment. "She came to me," Mayan said finally. "6 months ago. She came to me and said she was afraid, that she watched what was happening with you, and she stopped. She loves you, in her way. She made the wrong decision about how to show it." "You should have told her no," Taejun said. "Yes," Mayan said. Just that. Just yes. The most unqualified word she had used in the entire conversation. "I should have," she said. "I should have told her she was wrong and that this wasn't the answer, and I should have." She stopped. Something moved through her face that Naya watched with the particular attention of someone who has been waiting for a long time to see whether the thing she suspected existed behind the performance actually did. "I was afraid too," Mayan said quietly. "That's not an excuse. I'm telling you because you asked me to be honest." Taejun looked at his mother for a long time. The room was very still. "I know," he said finally. He said it without anger, without the weight of judgment. Just the acknowledgement of a son who understands that the person who raised him is not the simplified version of themselves he sometimes needed them to be, that she is a person, complicated and afraid, and capable of terrible decisions made from real fear, and that knowing this doesn't make the decisions acceptable, but it makes them human. "I'm going to go now," he said. "Jihoon is outside. He's going to come in and walk you through the legal situation, what you're facing, what your options are. I would strongly recommend that you listen to him because he's trying to help you, and he's better at this than whatever lawyer you've already called." Mayan said nothing, and Iyama, he paused at the door. "When this is further along, when there's some distance from last night, I'm going to want to have a different conversation about what comes next, about whether there's a version of this family that still functions." He paused. "I don't know what that version looks like yet. But I'm not closing the door entirely, because that's not who I am." Mayan looked at her son. For the first time since they had walked into this room for the first time, in what felt to Naya like perhaps a very long time, beyond just today, Mayan Kang looked at her son without strategy, without the layer of management, just looked at him, the way a person looks at something they are afraid of losing, and have not yet fully understood that they already have. "Taejun, she said. He waited. She opened her mouth. She closed it. "Take care of yourself," she said finally. He nodded once. They left. Outside in the sharp morning air, with the water of the lake visible through the trees at the edge of the property, and Ji-hoon's car visible at the gate, and the particular quality of a morning that had too much in it to be held all at once. Taejun stopped on the front steps and put both hands on the railing and looked at the water and breathed. Naya stood beside him. She didn't say anything. She wasn't sure there was anything to say that would add to the moment rather than interrupt it. She had learned, in 3 years of loving this man, that certain things he needed to process in the first person, not alone exactly, but without being narrated at. After a while he said, "Are you okay?" "Yes," she said. Then, because she was done with the automatic version of that answer, "I'm tired. And I have a headache that started sometime around the wine last night and hasn't quit. And I'm okay." He looked at her. He stopped. "What you said in there. It needed to be said." "Yes," he paused. "It did." He held her gaze. "Thank you for coming. You don't have to thank me for that. I know, I'm doing it anyway." He took her hand. They walked to the car. The first week after that night was not quiet. The fraud investigation generated paperwork and legal contacts and a series of calls between Ji-hoon and 3 different attorneys representing Byung-jun, Mihaeon, and Jinsu respectively. Jinsu, in the end, was the one who surprised Taejun the most, not by fighting it, but by not fighting it. He called Taejun directly, 4 days after the transfer attempt, and said, "I've known you since you were a boy. I was wrong. Tell me what you need from me, and I'll give it to you." Taejun told him. What he needed was full documentation, every communication, every meeting, every decision point in the 6 months of planning. Jinsu provided it within 36 hours. It was thorough, organized, and included communications that implicating him more fully than not providing it would have. He did it anyway. Taejun spent a long time looking at those documents, trying to decide what it meant that a man who had participated in an attempted theft was also capable of this particular honesty afterward, and concluded that it meant what most things about people meant, that the categories of good and bad were not designed to hold actual humans without some significant overflow at the edges. Byung-jun retained counsel and said nothing. Mihaeon released a statement through her lawyer, claiming the transfer request had been a clerical error and she hadn't understood what she was signing. Nobody believed her. The bank's investigation ran its course, as investigations do slowly, thoroughly, without drama. What would come of it legally was still unresolved at the end of the month. Ji-hoon said it would likely resolve in some form of civil settlement rather than criminal charges, partly because the transfer had never completed, and partly because the family relationship complicated prosecution. Taejun accepted this with the equanimity of a man who has learned that legal outcomes and moral clarity are not the same thing and require separate accounting. The harder situation was Sora. She called him 11 days after the night of the dinner. Not a text, an actual call, at 7 in the evening when she knew, because she knew his schedule, that he would be home. He picked up on the 3rd ring and said nothing, just waited, because he needed to know what version of his sister was on the other end of the line before he decided how to respond to her. "I'm sorry," she said. Her voice was rough. She'd been crying recently or for a long time, or both. "I know," he said. "Appa." The word broke a little in her mouth. "I don't know how to..." She stopped. "I was so afraid of losing you. Of watching you change, watching everything change, and being left behind. And Iyama said there was a way to make sure that couldn't happen, and She stopped again. "It was stupid. It was the stupidest thing I've ever done, and I knew it was stupid, and I did it anyway because I was scared." He sat with that for a moment. "You were going to steal from me," he said. "I know. And you thought that was how you kept from losing me." She didn't answer, which was its own answer. "Sora," he exhaled slowly, "I need you to hear me say this. What you did was a betrayal. Not just legally between us. As siblings," he paused. "And I'm not going to pretend it wasn't because I love you." She was crying. He could hear it now, controlled but real. "But I also need you to hear that I'm not done with you," he said. That's not who I am, and it's not what I want for us." He paused. "I need time. I need you to give me time to figure out how to be your brother on the other side of this. Because I don't know what that looks like yet." "How much time?" she asked. "I don't know," he said honestly. That's the honest answer. She was quiet for a moment. Is Naya, she started. Stopped. Is your wife okay? Taejun looked across the room to where Naya was sitting on the couch grading papers, her reading glasses on, her feet tucked under her, a cup of tea going cold on the table beside her because she always forgot to drink it once she got focused. She hadn't looked up, giving him the privacy of the call, but her presence in the room was something he had been aware of every moment of the conversation, a specific kind of awareness that was new in quality, if not in category. She's okay, he said. Tell her Sora stopped. Tell her I'm sorry. I know that's not enough. Tell her anyway. You'll tell her yourself, he said. Eventually, when we get to that point. He meant it as a statement of intention, thing that would happen when the time was right. Sora seemed to understand it that way, because she exhaled a long, shaky exhale and said, okay. He hung up. Nia looked up from her papers. Sora, she asked. Yes. How is she? He looked at his wife. The reading glasses. Cold tea. The stack of student essays that she had been working through since 6 p.m. with the particular focus of someone who finds meaning in the work they do rather than just the paycheck at the end of it. The emerald dress was at a tailor's downtown, a woman Nia had found, who specialized in vintage repairs, who had told them she could save it. They were waiting to hear. She's sorry, he said. Nia took her glasses off, looked at him. Do you believe her? Yes, he said. I believe she's sorry. I believe it was genuinely fear and not malice. He paused. I also believe that genuine fear doesn't excuse what she chose to do with it. Both things, Nia said. Both things. She put her glasses back on and returned to her papers. He sat across from her and watched her work for a while without opening his laptop. Just watched. The particular way she annotated in the margins quick, decisive marks with a red pen, and then sometimes a small star next to something a student had written that surprised her. A habit he had discovered 3 months into their marriage when he'd seen her grading late one night and asked what the stars meant, and she'd said it means they said something I didn't see coming. He thought about his mother. Mayon had not called. He had not called her. Jihoon reported that she had accepted the legal restructuring of the property arrangement without challenge, which surprised Taejun until Jihoon explained that she'd likely been advised it was the wisest concession, given everything else that was in motion. Strategy, even in retreat, he hadn't expected anything different. What he had not expected, what he found himself returning to in the quieter moments of the days that followed the night at Mercer Island, was the thing Mion had said as they were leaving. The way she'd said his name, Taejun, and then the pause, the long pause, and then take care of yourself. He turned it over, tried to locate what had been inside it, what she had meant to say, what she had started to say, and then decided not to. He was fairly sure he knew, or knew the outline of it. But knowing the outline of something and knowing the thing itself were different, and this was one of the gaps he had decided to live with, at least for now. His mother was afraid, had been afraid for a long time, had acted from that fear in ways that caused damage she might never fully account for, and still existed, somewhere in that complicated truth, as the woman who had raised him not perfectly, not without her own ambitions and distortions running through everything she did, but with a form of love that was real, even when the expression of it was wrong. He was not going to resolve that, not soon, possibly not ever entirely. He was going to live alongside it and make decisions one at a time and try to make them clearly. Nia looked up from her papers again. You're staring at me, she said. Yes. Is there something you want to say? He thought about it. There's something I want you to know, he said. I've been thinking about how to say it for a week, and I haven't found the perfect version, so I'm going to say the imperfect version. She took her glasses off again, set them on the table, gave him her full attention. I know that what happened over the last 3 years cost you something that I didn't pay, he said. I know that you came into this family and were treated as unwelcome and absorbed that treatment alone, and that my absence, my decision not to see what was there to be seen made that worse. He paused. I can't give that back to you. I can't retroactively make it easier than it was. She was very still. What I can do, he said, is make sure the next 3 years are different. Not because things will be clean, they won't be. The situation with my mother and Sora is going to take a long time. and won't resolve neatly. But because you won't be carrying it alone, he held her gaze. I'm paying attention now. I want you to hold me to that. Naya looked at him for a moment. Really looked at him, the way she did when she was checking. Something against an internal standard, not suspicion, but the particular care of a person who has learned that promises sound the same whether or not they hold. I'll hold you to it, she said. Good, and Taejun. She held his gaze. I need to say something back. He waited. I hid things from you because I told myself it was protection, she said. And some of it was. She stopped. Looked down at the essay in her lap, then back at him. Some of it was fear, my own version. I was afraid that if you saw how bad it was, you'd feel forced to act, and I was afraid of what you'd choose, and underneath that, she paused. Underneath that, I was afraid you'd choose them. The room was quiet. You were afraid I'd choose my family over you, he said. I knew you wouldn't, she said immediately. I knew it here. She touched her chest. But here, she moved her hand slightly, a less precise gesture. Here I was 19 years old, watching my mother take money from a man and tell me a lie about it, and learning that the people who love you can still not tell you things you needed to know. And I brought that into this marriage, and I'm still carrying it, and I think she stopped. I think I owe you honesty about that, about why the silence felt like safety to me, even when it was making things worse. He was looking at her with the expression she had come to understand, meant he was taking in something he was going to carry carefully. I know, he said. I don't want to keep doing that, she said. But I need you to understand that it's going to take. It's not going to fix itself, because I've decided to be honest. It's going to take me practicing something that doesn't come naturally to me. But I know that too, he said. I'll practice, she said. I'm telling you that, so you know what it means when I practice badly. He almost smiled. When you practice badly. When I go quiet on something I should be saying. Or when I give you the fine version when it's not fine. I'm telling you now, so that when it happens you can call it out instead of letting it go. Deal, he said. She put her glasses back on. He finally opened his laptop. They worked across from each other in the quiet of the evening, and the tea went cold, and the stack of essays got shorter on one side and taller on the other. And as outside the windows, Seattle did its evening things, the light changing, the distant sound of the city in its perpetual negotiation with itself. And for the first time in a very long time, the silence between them felt like the right kind. The dinner happened 3 months later, Naya's idea. She'd proposed it in early November quietly, as a statement more than a question. I want to host something. Here, my people, a few of yours. Small. Taejun had said yes before she finished the sentence. She spent 2 weeks on the guest list. Not because she agonized over it, but because she was deliberate about it, in the way she was deliberate about things that mattered. 12 people in the end, Marcus and his wife, who had been Naya's closest friends for 8 years, 2 of her colleagues from the school, one of whom had been mentoring Naya since her first year teaching, Taejun's cousin Young-soo, who was the one Kang family member who had sat at that dinner table in September and looked away immediately, and who had called Nia 3 weeks later to apologize in a message that was halting and genuine and had cost him something to write, Ji-hoon and his wife, and 6 of Nia's students who had received early college acceptance letters in the weeks preceding kids she had stayed late for, advocated for, believed in through the specific kind of sustained attention that a good teacher carries for students and that nobody ever fully sees. Kids were the center of it. That was the point. Taejun understood this without it being explained. On the night of the dinners, he was in the kitchen by 3 in the afternoon, coordinating with the caterer in a way that was more precise than it needed to be, and Nisa stood in the doorway, watching him argue gently but firmly about the proper preparation of a specific dish that Marcus's wife was allergic to, and she felt something she didn't immediately have a name for. Called her mother, not because there was unfinished business between them, there was, but tonight was not the night for it. She called because she wanted to hear her mother's voice, and because the relationship between them had changed in the weeks since September in ways that required tending, and tending sometimes just looked like a phone call on a Saturday afternoon to say, "I'm thinking of you." "How are you?" Evelyn asked. Good, Nia said. And then, because she was practicing actually good, not performing good. Different, Evelyn said. Yes. Her mother was quiet for a moment. I'm glad, baby. Mom, Nia paused. I need you to come to Seattle. Not now, we're hosting tonight. But soon. Before Christmas. Nia, I know it's complicated, Nia said. I'm not asking you to sit across from Taejun's mother. I'm asking you to sit across from my husband and have dinner. And be honest. She paused. He's not holding the money against you. I need you to believe that. Her mother was quiet for a long time. Okay. Yes, baby. Okay. A pause. I'll come. They hung up. Taejun appeared in the doorway. Everything all right? He asked. My mother is coming for Christmas, Nia said. He absorbed this. Okay, as he looked at her. Yes. I know it's complicated, Nia. He held her gaze steadily. I told you. The money is a thing that happened between two people who aren't us. I meant it. He paused. Your mother is coming for Christmas. That's a good thing. She looked at him for a moment. You're better at this than I expected, she said. Than you expected 3 years ago? Than I expected, period. Corner of his mouth moved. I'm not sure whether to be offended. Be a little offended, she said. It'll be good for you. He went back to the kitchen. The guests arrived at 7. The students came in a group 6 of them, ranging from 17 to 18, dressed in the particular way that teenagers dress for events they want to take seriously, without looking like they're trying. Which is to say, each of them had made a specific but slightly imprecise effort that Nia found completely charming. She greeted them at the door herself, introduced them to Taejun, who shook each hand and asked each of them something specific about the school they'd been accepted to, because he had read the list Nia gave him that morning and remembered all of it. The kid named Deshaun, 17, quiet, the one who had come to Nia's classroom at 7:30 in the morning for 3 months to work on his application essays, because the apartment he shared with his grandmother was too loud. For concentration, looked at the house and then at Nia, and said very quietly, "This is really nice, Mrs. Kang." Mrs. Kang. She had been Mrs. Kang for 3 years, and she still sometimes registered it with a small internal adjustment, the slight surprise of a name becoming yours, of answering to something you chose rather than were born to. Deshaun said it with a naturalness that meant was simply what she was to him, her name in his world, the person who stayed late and left stars in the margins and made him feel like the thing he'd written was worth being surprised by. "Thank you for coming," she said. He nodded and went inside and immediately got into a conversation with young Sue that somehow, within 5 minutes, became an animated exchange about basketball. Nia stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her guests in her living room. Marcus was laughing at something Jihoon's wife had said. Colleague who'd mentored Nia was at the bookshelf, reading spines. 2 of the students were studying the photographs on the credenza pictures from Nia and Taejun's trip to Chicago, a picture of Nia's department at last year's faculty retreat, a picture of Taejun and Nia from a camping trip 6 months ago, where she had been unreasonably cold, and he had given her his flannel shirt, and she was wearing it in the photo with an expression that was equal parts miserable and happy. She felt Taejun beside her. He had come to stand in the doorway with her, and he was looking at the same thing she was looking at, the room, the people in it. The specific quality of noise that meant people were actually talking to each other, not performing conversation for an audience. "Green," he said quietly. She looked down at her dress. The emerald green dress, returned from the tailor 2 weeks ago, with the shoulder seam repaired, in a way that was, the tailor had told her, actually stronger than the original. You could see where it had been mended, if you looked closely, a slight difference in the texture of the stitching. Nia had looked at it in the mirror when she tried it on and decided she liked it better this way. The repair was honest. It told the truth about what the dress had been through, without pretending the damage hadn't happened. They never ruined the color, she said. He looked at her. The look that saw her. No, he said, they didn't. He took her hand. They stood in the doorway of their home, a word she had spent 3 years being unable to quite claim, that was now settling into her vocabulary with a new and unambiguous weight, and the dinner happened around them and inside them, and was not perfect in any of the ways that perfection is imagined. Deshawn knocked a water glass over and caught it before it fell and looked so relieved that the entire table laughed. Marcus gave a toast that went 2 minutes longer than necessary and included an anecdote about the first time he'd met Nia that made Taejun file away for future reference. One of Nia's students got into a thoughtful but slightly heated debate with Ji-hoon about a book they'd both apparently read and disagreed about fundamentally. And the debate was the kind that didn't resolve. That ended with both of them saying they'd think about it, which was the best possible outcome. Taejun served the food. He poured the wines himself. He checked twice on the student with a dietary restriction, without drawing attention to it, in the way that care operates when it's not performing itself. Nia watched him do all of it. She watched and understood, for the first time without the background noise of uncertainty running underneath the understanding, what she had. Not a man without complication, he had plenty of complication, would always have plenty of complication, and the months ahead were going to require them both to navigate things that weren't clean. But a man who was paying attention, who had chosen to pay attention finally, and was doing it without being asked. That was not nothing. In fact, it was close to everything. After the dinner, after the students had gone and the last guests had said their good nights, Nia and Taejun were in the kitchen together. She washed, he dried. They had fallen into this rhythm, without deciding to, somewhere in the first year of the marriage. The after-dinner ritual that was unglamorous and entirely domestic, and which she had come to understand, was one of the places where she felt most accurately located. Deshawn asked me what I did, Taejun said, drying a glass. What did you say? I said finance. That's accurate. He said he thought finance was boring. He put the glass away. Then he asked if I knew anyone at the University of Washington Business School. Nia laughed, a real laugh, the kind that comes from the middle of something rather than the surface. What did you say? I said I might know a few people. He looked at her. I told him to ask you for my number. She handed him another glass. He's going to use it. I know. That's why I said it. She looked at her husband. At this man who had put Sora's apartment on hold, not terminated on hold, pending the conversation they hadn't had yet. Who had restructured his mother's excess without putting her on the street, because that was who he was. Who was going to spend the next year managing the legal and personal fallout of a family that had betrayed him in 2 different directions simultaneously, and who was going to do it without collapsing into it. Who had told a 17-year-old kid to ask Nia for his number. Thank you, she said. For what? For tonight. For being she stopped. Try it again. For being someone my students could meet. He was quiet for a moment. Thank you, he said, for not leaving. She looked at him. I wasn't going to leave. I know. I'm thanking you anyway. She handed him the last dish. He dried it, put it away. The kitchen was quiet and clean, and the house was theirs, and the night was theirs, and tomorrow was going to arrive with its complications. But tomorrow was tomorrow, and tonight was finished, and what had been finished in it was real. She dried her hands. He was looking at her. What? She said. Nothing, he said. Just, he paused, stars. She looked at him. That's the word, he said quietly. For the thing I've been trying to find the word for. She understood him. She understood him the way she understood most of what he didn't say aloud, not because it had always been easy, but because she had put in the years that made it possible. She understood that he meant, you were the thing I didn't see coming. You were the thing that surprised me. You were the thing I put a star next to. She didn't say any of this. She didn't need to. She turned the kitchen light off, and they went upstairs, and the house settled around them into its nighttime self, quiet and certain, and for the first time since a woman in an emerald dress had walked through its front doors 3 years ago, carrying the practiced stillness of someone who had decided she would endure whatever was required entirely hers.